All right, we're live.
Hello and welcome to the Bevry channel's weekly discussion. I guess we can't really call it weekly anymore. Our intermittently weekly discussion. We're in the seventh in our video series exploring the work of John Vervake and his broad view of the development of cognitive science. And
Hello and welcome.
that
Was
that's
that
the
you?
start of it. Yeah. I guess the delay on it started
I
a
had
long.
just said to make sure to close it out before starting off, but
No, I never close it out, but I hit the mute button. Yeah.
didn't work.
It's because they don't have it active before it begins, and
That's
then
what I was saying. You have to open up a new tab, mute the YouTube video. That way, any new YouTube videos that you'll open up will be muted automatically. That's
yeah,
just a tip for all you guys.
I don't have consistency on that. It doesn't always do that for me.
It just worked for me just now. So,
Oh, I'm sure it does.
all right. Yes. So we're gonna be
Right,
going over
yeah. We're
lectures.
going over the seventh, and here we are. We're ready to talk about it. This is going to be discussing essentially the ground of a lot of our philosophical discussion arising from Aristotle's work, which arose from the prior discussion of Plato's work. And yeah, so we're joined today by Pleasure of Doubt, who is a big fan of Aristotle and his conception of potential, and John Buck, who is a budding YouTube philosopher.
Almost budding. Yeah.
Almost budding, almost nascent. Almost nascent. And Sumit, who is our resident view from the colonial area of the world. So here we are, and we're going to discuss all of our various perspectives on the work. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least for me, this has been a very helpful, like, quick thing to go over and get a good understanding of like Aristotle's perception of the world. At least, I mean, that's the thing. Aristotle is such a kind of monumental thinker that he has a lot of different pies that he's got his fingers in. But at least for Aristotle's kind of view of like overall metaphysics of creatures and causes and things like that. So he brings in this example of like you can have the person that designs a chair and then you can have the person that creates a chair. And then he asks the question, okay, which one has a better knowledge of what a chair is? And it's the person that created the chair, because that person actually can cause a chair to come into existence or through its creation, over the person that just has a like ability to detail and map all of the features of what a chair would be in it, I guess, kind of its essence. So the chair maker has a better knowledge in his ability to create the thing in question.
Well, I don't know if we can say it's better per se, but we can definitely say it's more of something, right? There's something deficient in your knowledge if you cannot produce it. So that's actually, I think, how he ended up making his divisions between the various kinds of causes, is what areas of understanding or knowledge are deficient when you attempt to extrapolate these things. So knowledge of what a thing is and knowledge of how to produce it and for what it is, to be used for, are all things that are not mutually exclusive, but non-overlapping, so to speak, right? You can have knowledge of one without knowledge of the other. But in joining all those things together, you have a more integrated view. And that is something that he starts to understand when he opposes the two worldviews of conformity, right? And then this other notion of centrality and probably more like the thing in hearing within itself all of its causes, versus this kind of back and forth development of cause and form and structure, which is a dialogue between subject and object.
Right, and that's what was brought up in the sixth lecture, that there, like, you can have the Newtonian view of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, but for dynamic systems like living creatures, there's kind of a feedback loop that's occurring between the tree that's growing outwards its limbs to receive the sunlight, and then the sunlight being used as energy for the tree to grow out its limbs even further. That's kind of like a recurring cycle that's happening. Whereas
it's beautiful that occurs at the boundary level, right? It's beautiful that that's where that occurs, that the seed erupts from the ground and grows up into a new space. Because that seems to be where all of our insights are when we break into the framework of another. We break through a boundary into the framework of another understanding, and then we find some set of words and concepts that are meaningful in both, and that squeezes together this greater understanding. That's the synthesis, right? That process is going on all the time. And just so I don't get away from the point that I made earlier, that it's not necessarily better knowledge. And to give you an example of one instance where this is the case, to know how a nuclear bomb works through fusion gives you extraordinary knowledge for technological purposes in developing fission-related technology. But to know how to build a nuclear bomb, that's not necessarily better knowledge, right?
I see. Yeah. So, okay. So, and I think Aristotle would certainly agree with you. It's just certainly unique knowledge. So, like the chair maker has, and I think Aristotle kind of really relies on that way. Like, in order to describe I guess, a function of a thing, you have to describe what it has a unique capacity to do that other things don't have that such capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then what ends up happening as you do this, as you go through this process of attempting to understand what is different about each individual things, and then also how it's different in the way that they all interact, you develop this picture that he starts to describe in the lecture, which is the realm of the arena, where things act within that arena. And it is the continual interaction between those two things and amongst each other that starts to shape the world. And the rules that are engaged in that process are really what I think Aristotle and Plato and all of us are now playing around with. Is like, what are those rules that help us push all the pieces together and take them apart and put them back together and take them apart and put them back together? We've gotten to such an extraordinary capacity that we can now, in real time, summon forth the combined intellect and exploratory powers of thousands of years of people, right? So I can just say, oh, Plato, and instantly you can have flashes of like the Republic and the dialogues and all of this information that's related to the development of a coherent picture of the world, of sense making, right? And you can just summon all of that as a process of your normal educational process, and it's truly fascinating. But it's now kind of what was once outside in the world, right? What was the knowledge of Plato, the knowledge of Socrates, the knowledge of Aristotle, and not the knowledge of John, and not the knowledge of Pod, or the knowledge of Tyler or Sumit. Sumit, you got to say something so I remember you're here, right? You're still there, right?
Yeah, I'm still here, but so far I've got nothing to add. I'm just listening.
That was good enough.
Beside, my neck is hurting, so I have to lie horizontally listening to you guys.
Oh, that's from the same neck problems you were having before?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so rest then. That's good. Yeah, so all of that knowledge which was external has now come inside us, right? It's internalized into this, it's centered itself within us, so to speak. And our attempts to summon our concepts of Plato and his understanding of the world and all of that, it's now coming from within. That process of external data and truth and value moving inwards and then coming back out in our own internal perception of it, right? Like our sharing of it. That is, I think, what's being discussed here, that are attempting to be understood. Like, what is... Yeah, all right, so let me stop there and just let you guys...
Well, I think one interesting aspect of how Aristotle's framing it, I think today we would frame it in terms of layers of abstraction, that we can talk about really any concept, with the concept of a chair at different layers. We can just conceive of it as something to sit on. We can conceive of it as something crafted with legs and arms, and we can go even deeper into the mechanics of actually putting it together, the nails or the screws, and each of these levels is useful on its own. So like you said, it's not better or worse, but it depends on what your purpose is. Most people don't need to know how to craft a chair, but we need some people who know how to craft a chair to have good chairs. And it relates to the fact of that all of our concepts, all of our definitions or words are sort of social constructs. We say we're describing something that exists in reality, the chair, but we can conceive of it in a lot of different ways. And
have you ever seen a really beautiful rocking chair, like just the most extraordinarily beautiful rocking chair you've ever seen? You go and sit in it, and it's like the worst thing you've ever sat in your life. The back is too straight, the angle is funny at your hips, and they don't know what a logarithmic spiral is, so they curved the bottom pieces wrong, and it just kind of rocks away. That's the difference between knowing the use of a chair, right? Its function, its form and structure for the use, and then the difference between how to build one and make it look pretty and attractive in a particular way, right? Like, and it is through it's through the use of the object that you arrive at this new knowledge, this new understanding. Right?
Although interesting, I mean, the beauty of that chair is a use in its own. Part of
it attracted you to it.
That chair is maybe not to sit in it, but to have people look at it and say that's a beautiful object we've crafted, even though it's not terribly comfortable.
For sure. Like if you're doing Barbie houses or doll houses, people do this. They'll make little miniatures or models of anything, right? The little miniatures that just the only function really is to match it in image, because you can't use it at its real size. So.
Yeah. So yeah, just as you were saying, pleasure, that like we have these different ways of describing things, like the four causes of Aristotle, and those are very much like very useful in communicating with each other. And especially because like I see sometimes people get hung up and like they're talking about what is the efficient cause of the thing, while another person is talking about, say, like the formal or the material cause of the thing, like what caused this to come into be, like who made this or what made this, and then the other is like, what is this made out of? Like they're both talking about the cause to this, but they're using the different terms within their own heads. And so I think having Aristotle's conceptions of the four causes is very good. The other thing that I think is very interesting that I don't know that I think is not brought up, or maybe it's not as well seen by Aristotle or the Aristotelians, that a thing existing has multiple functions or ends that it achieves, rather than a singular one that it was imbued with. Just like we're talking about with the chair. So like you could say the function of the rocking chair, the beautiful rocking chair, was to be rocked within. But because it was made such shoddily by the creator, the only function that it can actually achieve well is aesthetic value that it can have for people. And so that's a weird thing, that like even though this was created for a specific function, it did not align with that function well, and instead utilized a differing function and then maximized that. And you can kind of see that with evolution as well. Like there's these things that we will evolve, and then they'll serve their niche purpose in that time and space, and then over time that niche purpose or that niche usage is no longer relevant, so it'll have to kind of adapt to a differing thing. And so exact. So the very function that it was created for is delegated to a different function. And this is also the other thing that Peterson brings up in one of his lectures, that like, okay, so what is the function of a car? Oh, it's to get me from point A to point B. But that's not the only end that is achieved through the usage of that car. Like perhaps the function of a car is to restructure society so that anybody can be within a local area within a very short amount of time. Perhaps the function of the car is to change the carbon percentage in the atmosphere. Perhaps the the function of the car or the end that is achieved through the use of the car. It is the fact that people have this idea of individual autonomy for what they are supposed to be doing with their own lives. Like that was something he talked about in regards to communism, is that just by having I know we're getting off from Vervake into Peterson, but I think it's somewhat relevant, at least to Aristotle. Within the Soviet Union, by having a car, it's like there was this underlying axiom of a car with only one driver, and for people being able to have a car, that a person has the ability and the like they deserve to get to choose where they drive and where they go. So just by giving people that capacity.
It's not even deserve, maybe. It's just the fact that it's possible. The environment allows it. It's
a capacity that is almost incongruent with the communist kind of conception of
okay, that word right there, incongruence. Congruence is the conformity process. It's when you bring two things together and you find out, do they fit or not? And that's exactly right. That's so in I'm going to butcher my Russian history here, or Soviet history, but in the late 80s or during the 80s, there were these periods of intense cultural change that were occurring, and they were being allowed from the top down, glasnost, or whatever the technical terms were. And these were what we're doing was allowing an environmental change. Right? It's not actually changing the individuals, but it's changing the environment. And as the environment changed, it allowed the individuals to grow into it. And the type of environment that they grew into was something like the capitalist market, as envisioned, by looking at America from Russia. But that's always happening. That's how our environments get changed. Because at the social level, our environments are defined by the rules and laws that we enact, as well as the physical structures, right? So the car is a great example because it's actually a physical, it's not a law, right? There are laws that govern how it's built and used, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Not so much in Russia. And have you ever watched the dash cam footage coming out of Russia?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that dash cams are so prevalent over there. But
so it's almost like a dynamic feedback system, sort of like a
not almost, it definitely is.
Okay.
Right? Definitely.
So even though it's an inanimate object, through its interaction with a complex system such as society, mm-hmm. it has the ability to adapt the society, especially when it's put into max or a large amount of usage. Then that restructures society to the point that it's now using the car in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, so, for sure. Well, I mean, like, let's say the steering wheel is cold in the morning or it's too small to grip. Well, what do? You put a steering wheel cover on, right? You make minor alterations to the environment. You tint your windows or hang a air freshener in your rear view mirror. Like, you do all these things that start to shape your environment, which hopefully shape you. So if your car stinks, it's because you are getting a sense input that's saying, whoa, smoke too many cigarettes, right? Putting them in Mother Russia, cigarettes smoke you. That's the exact opposite, right? So that's the conforming process. I put up the air freshener so that I'm trying to alter that smell in my nose. I don't want it to be bad. I want it to be good. I'm changing my environment to alter myself. And until the environment exists, right? Until the air freshener concept exists, I don't really have that capacity. Like, it's just, it smells bad in here, right? There is no choice. There's no capacity to change who I am and what I want to do. But if I know about air fresheners, I can bring that concept in. And I can say, I can put an air freshener in my car and alter the environment, which then alters me.
Right. So that's what Vervake brings in as the conforming. So he brings in he.
Oh, wait, do we want to get to, are we going through an order, or like that comes a little bit later? Do we want to get the earlier stuff or
jump a little bit? If there's something that we skip over and you
if you want to go into something else first, we're welcome to do that.
We should use the whiteboard whenever we need to.
Like, early on at about around 4 minutes into the video, he's talking about Aristotle's concept of rationalization, and he adds something that I don't think we talk a lot about when we talk about being rational. At least I haven't heard it talked about a lot. He says to be wise is to cultivate a character. To rationalize is self-reflection, self-actualization. And it's where he says we can, what we can do is reflect and self-correct. This is the hallmark of rationality. The core idea is the capacity to reflectively reason, the self-capacity for illusion and error and self-correction. And again, I think when we talk about rationality, at least out there in conversations I've had, we focus on, logic and, reason, evidence, so on. But we don't often talk about to be rational means to look inward at our ideas and our arguments and to it's more than just the base ability to logically analyze. The key ability is to then reanalyze, to self-reflect and correct. So this continuous process of having our ideas, making our arguments, getting new input, and then going back and rechecking what we originally figured out. And I think that's an interesting addition to describe how we're thinking rationally. If all we're doing is sort of parroting an argument, we're not, that's part of rationality, but if we're not self-reflecting, we're not having that sort of that feedback loop, that internal feedback loop, are we really being fully rational?
Yeah, so there's an interrupt cycle that occurs, I think, in the learning process. Usually it ends up defining a lot of our personality traits, characteristics, all sorts. So I'll walk through how it happens, I think. Like when you're a kid, you don't have to teach a kid how to lie. They just know how to do it. It's inherent, right? Did you do that? No, right? You don't have to teach them how to do that. Just no, it's instant. Or if they want something, did you eat a cookie already? No. I can still have another. I can have a cookie. Were you about to say another cookie? No. Right? Like, so it's goal, desire. They vision. I want cookie. How do I get it? Ask. Then I have to lie. Right? So now they're presented with this choice: truth or lie. So they lie. If they get the cookie, they reached their goal. Right? So that is learning a strategy for how to get what you want in your environment. Now, if you stop right there, if you stop all analysis and you then define a rule, okay, if I want something, I can lie and get it, and you get no further input, right? You can just go through the rest of your life and you'll do pretty good, actually. You can just lie a bunch, you can get whatever you want.
Maybe we can get into that. You can do good in some ways, but there's downsides, yeah.
Well, there are lots of downsides. All right, sure. Pretty good as defined by certain metrics. But if you don't discontinue analysis, if you do in fact allow the internal states to change, what happens is you open yourself for further analysis, right? So what you do is you say, okay, I got the cookie. But then 30 minutes later, when mom figures out that you lied, she has a frown on her face and she gets upset and she puts you in timeout. Now this is a separate instance of phenomena in the environment that you have to chronologically tie to your prior behavior. If you don't do that, you don't make the connection. You don't see the causal relationship. But if you do it, what it does is it allows you to bring in a further, more distal, chronologically related concept, which is, oh, okay, so the outcome is not only, oh, I got the cookie. The outcome is also, if I lie, there's a potential consequence that does this. Now, if you bring that consequence in, it allows you to make an adjustment. So it's an actual analysis that your brain is doing. Okay, did I like the taste of the cookie more than I liked the pain of dealing with mother? It's a real analysis going on all the time. And we do that, I think, with every emotional affect that we come into in our life. And we do it very early on. So we're not usually aware of the complexity or the nuance involved in a lot of that. And it's kind of deeply buried in us, but we're always doing it even now.
And we can say at each of those stages, we're being rational. The thought, if I lie, I'll get what I want, that's rational. Right. Whether it's moral or not, it's another matter, but it's rational. It's using logic and, it's going through A leads to B leads to C. But yeah, the question is, where do we stop? And if we're not getting to the point of self-reflection, then we're stopping too early.
Yeah. And I think that has to do with, in the Piagetian sense, the type of games that you're willing to play or that you're wanting to play is how so I can get that cookie one time and that's my game, right? And maybe I can do it 2 or 3 times, but mom's going to start to catch on. And once she catches on, I can no longer play that game anymore. I have to now I start, this is how we develop our routes in life. So I have to make a choice. Do I become better at lying to further that strategy? Or do I determine another route, which is something like, if I'm honest, mother is more willing to reward me, right? So if mother is able to instill that concept in the child or father or whoever, right? I don't want to be sexually preferential here, or gendered, or however you think of it. So if that doesn't happen, I think what you end up going with is the most energy efficient route. It's something like that. And that's like a base analysis at like the neurotransmitter glucose level energy amount. And that's almost always lying, I think. If the lie is believable, right? If you're a bad liar, then find another strategy.
What you were talking about though, pleasure or doubt, it made me think about how like sometimes we had this idea about rationality as like building up a set of true things and facts, and like, oh, I'm getting a greater knowledge set and I'm working with all of that together. But for sometimes, like just going about in life, sometimes we build up some sort of model of reality and then we work with that, but the model of reality only works partially well or something like that. And there's occasions in which we have some sort of eureka moment and have to recreate that model of reality that we had prior to the hand, which also in turn kind of reconceptualize all the facts beforehand. So I kind of consider it almost like watching a movie with some sort of twist ending at the end. So you'll be building up your understanding of the characters and all of that, and then, oh, there's Bruce Willis. It turns out he's a ghost. Then that has to change all of your ways that you thought about that movie beforehand. And it's not like this is only happening for fiction, because we're always using our limited knowledge set when we're interacting with the world. We're very much using just the models that we've been creating. And so we have to go through that process of rationality of re-understanding what we know already with what we're being faced with currently.
There's an interesting, this came up actually in I don't know, I don't want to spoil up in the recent Spider-Man Far From Home. There's an end credit scene that makes you go back and rethink.
Oh yeah.
A lot of stuff. Have you seen it? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I saw it, but I hadn't seen it.
I won't spoil it, but there's an end credit scene because it's still fairly recent. But there's an end credit scene that makes you go back, or is it enough time that we can spoil it? I don't know.
No. Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
It makes you go back and reevaluate a lot of things. And these are questions I had during the movie where I was saying, oh, there's something that isn't quite right there. And I remember thinking of in the movie, and then you get to the end credits and you're like, now it all makes sense. You got to go back through the entire thing.
Right. And that's the thing. It still leaves you kind of with this open question of like, there's still a lot of unanswered questions here, even though I do know something more, but it's still kind of left out there until, I guess, the next movie or whatever.
Yeah, and that's what you're defining there is kind of a comedy ending, right, rather than a tragedy. Tragedies end in, exactly what you were thinking the whole way through. Oh, this is awful. This is terrible. Wow, that's awful, right? And then it ends and it's like, oh, that really was awful, and no surprise. But the comedy is always a moment of laughter or kind of sublime understanding that occurs when you have the twist ending. So even when dealing with ghosts like Bruce Willis. Mm-hmm. There's not an element of like fear or creepiness involved in that. It's like a triumphant reversal. Weirdly enough, it like gives life to the movie to understand that he was dead. Very odd, but that is what occurs when you have to go back and alter your perception, right? And that is a fascinating experience. It's the redemption arc. It's the redemption story. All of that is tied into the ending altering the prior, right?
But bringing it into the practical, I think what a lot of people do, I think we all do it instinctively, is when we get new information, we start that there's that moment of starting to go back and reevaluate, but then we have that uncomfortable feeling of cognitive dissonance. And I think a lot of the time we don't let ourselves go back. We block ourselves from doing the full reanalysis, so we don't get the benefit of that. And I think this is really interesting what Vervake brought in, because I think it's something we should all be really just pushing, that you can't say you're being fully rational or as rational as you should be if you're not going back and doing that reevaluation. And if you're hitting that cognitive dissonance, well, that's a signal, that's an internal signal that there's something you should be going back and reevaluating.
Right. And like for me, I think, I don't know how applicable this is, but at least it gives me a good model to kind of work off of, is that an indicator for there being some sort of contradiction within a person's worldview is by looking at what they kind of construe as being of the same type of thing, but they don't have a well or clearly defined definition of what that thing is. So they kind of have this vague box, and whenever there's some sort of something that might or might not be the case, they kind of put it in that vague box and say, well, we won't be able to know. It's just something that's outside of what we'll be able to think about. And of course, it makes sense, because there is this whole category of things that we will not be able to know. And I mean, with your username, Pleasure of Doubt, doubt is a definite precondition to life, that we're unable to know everything. So there's going to have to be this category of things that we do not know. Now,
epistemic ambiguity is the ultimate safe space.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the point, is if you want to retain your current worldview, but you're faced with some sort of possible contradiction, you can place it within that epistemic ambiguity kind of realm. That way you can retain your worldview without having to deeply consider it, under the assumption that, okay, well, I can't have Cartesian certainty about this certain thing, and I can't have Cartesian certainty about this other thing. So I'm going to leave it up in the air to be, well, it might be the case, but it might not be.
Well, in my username, I took it, it was a play on a Voltaire quote, which is, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. And, but it's true. Like we're uncomfortable with doubt. It makes us feel bad. But that being said, doubt is what leads us to, I think, all the discovery that we do. It's to say, there's something I don't know. There's something I want to, well, there's different ways to see it. There's just, there's something I don't know. I believe this, but I want to make sure I'm on good footing. So I should always be open to the fact that I may be wrong about this. And that allows you to continually revise. That being said, too much doubt leads to, there are times where doubt's not good. Too much doubt can lead to paralysis.
Yes, I think that's actually the great danger, because what doubt is essentially creating a little vacuums, a little hole in understanding. Right. Whereas before you would have just merely tripped along in your thoughts and your activities and all that. For a moment, you have to stop and go, there's something I'm not understanding here.
But that's the thing. Like, doubt is a useful thing when you have a underperforming model of reality. So it creates that little hole or vacuum.
What if you can't create a proper cog to fit that hole? Right. That's the problem. Is now your epistemic uncertainty starts to expand. The ambiguities expand, and your whole sense-making apparatus falls apart when you get to a certain point, right? But that's I think the danger of it, though.
Well, this is why I think cognitive dissonance. I think this is why we evolved cognitive dissonance, because if you do go through life constantly challenging everything you believe, you're not going to get much done. So we evolved, I think, the biases in favor of what we currently believe, a bunch of different biases that allow us to sort of be to act effectively. That said, there are times where that bias works against us, when we are really trying to figure something out, trying to advance our knowledge, trying to, learn something new. That bias, which keeps us alive, I think, in other circumstances, can then work at a cross purpose and let you be too biased towards in favor of your current view. So it's this constant, it's about figuring out when should I allow my doubt to terrain, and when should I say, well, no, we have to act, and we're just going to make a decision, make the best decision we can, and then proceed based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, acting in the face of uncertainty. Interesting, right? Very difficult. Have you ever done a high dive, like a swimming pool or?
Yeah. I used to love the diving board, and I would dive like crazy. And then once I went off the high one and ended up, I forget if I landed on my back or my front, but it was one of those things, and it shocked me. And for several years after that, I could not go on a diving board, like even small ones anymore. I was terrified of it until one day I forced myself just to go off and jump. But yeah.
Yeah, so standing at the edge of it prior to the very first jump, you had all of this epistemic uncertainty, all the ambiguities, right, before you. Could I possibly die? Will I break my neck? Will I have a bloody nose? Will it be belly flop, right? Will I do a half spin and gainer and then land on my side? You know, like all this crazy stuff starts playing out. And then you slow yourself down. Maybe you're like, okay, I've seen other people do it. They were okay. So I might be able to do it too, right? You start to make frameworks that make sense of it. And then you leap, right? And in that moment, you discover something new. You discover that
you couldn't do it, and you land on your belly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's say the first time you don't land on your belly, and it's a rush. The conforming process elicits a smile, right? Laughter and joy. You did it. You made it. You pushed past that boundary, the condition of unknowing, right? And moved into the condition of knowing. And all of a sudden, you discovered that it wasn't the bad things that were right. It was the good things, that it was fun, and then you didn't die. But then you do that 10 times, and the 11th time you belly flop, and it kind of scars you. Yeah. And you realize that, you know, there isn't a certainty anymore, right? There never really was. You just thought there was, that you were developing this certainty. And there was some unknown element that you didn't take into account. Now, in that moment, I think for some people, especially if the trauma is so great, it produces a fear, a connection, a deep connection to the kind of the baser instincts that protected us for so long, that they can no longer approach highly emotionally charged issues, right? And we're seeing this in the political realm, for instance, without resorting to that deep emotional connection, and then no longer being able to rationally pull in, hey, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't lie to mom. Remember, like maybe I don't need that cookie. Maybe I can alter things a little bit and still be me, but a better me. Is that there's so much about change that people, you listen to the words that, especially teenagers, if you pay attention to what children are doing and how they're talking about themselves growing up, you get to see exactly how change is expressed linguistically, because it's such an interesting time. But so many of them are using words like, you don't know me, and right, that's not who I am, and it's this continual identification process.
Well, I think part of it is that there's these biases we have. Like when I went off the diving board and I tried a dive, not just a jump, I tried to dive and it went badly. My brain said, "Ooh, that was a bad experience. We should prevent you from doing that again." And so I developed an anxiety about that took a long time to get over. Now, I think it's the same process that's going on when we're talking about our ideas. Our brains are protecting us, except in this case, our brain can't tell the difference. It's just doing its thing. It can't tell that, well, you know what, sometimes you should not be afraid to change your mind, and not be afraid to that it's a good thing to self-reflect in that way and risk changing your previous, deeply held belief. But our brain can't necessarily tell the difference. So it's a battle, and bias is our common enemy, is what I've said. We have to battle ourselves to an extent. It's not a character flaw. It's an evolved self-preservation that, in sometimes, like with the belly flop, it's saying, hey, that acted really bad for you. You maybe shouldn't do that again. I want to stop you from breaking your neck. And that was pretty close that time, as you flipped over more, as you didn't go straight down and you kept on going. I mean, that you could have you'd done a little bit less, your neck would have, hit the water at a bad angle. So that keeps us alive. It's very good. We want that, to some extent. We don't want to, just be too eager to dive off the high diving board without thinking about it.
Right. But it also brings in a good point that, like, for certain occasions, like we have this built-in kind of like thing outside of our control of like, I have anxiety about this certain thing, and that anxiety can't even be like talked through rationally. It's something that's going to have to be like coddled or it's not necessarily coddled, but like taken account of and worked with. Like, I'm actually recognizing that you're anxious about this thing, and I'm going to use that somehow. And I'm not just going to say, hey, your anxiety is unfounded. Like, that doesn't matter because it's already there. So yeah.
So in many ways, I think in many circumstances, you can think of anxiety as just like it's a protective blanket, right? It's a protective mechanism. It's a preparation to run at any moment or fight or whatever, right? So it's that spooling up tension just before trying to decide what you're going to do in a fight or flight circumstance. That's what anxiety is. It's leading up into it when you're searching the space. But it's also a sense of not wanting to be altered by the space, right? Because anxiety is living in an arena where all of the objects or people in it are a negative affect, right? It's a negative emotional affect. So you look at it and you think, oh, danger. Whereas if I don't have anxiety and I'm in an arena, I can look at it and I see the world of possibility, right? Things that I can change and to be conformed in the process of changing. So that is the sense, I think, if you can switch that, right, that people will just lose their anxiety. If you can give them the sense that they're not in an arena of danger and that they have the capacity to alter their environment and be altered, and that process is not negative, you suppress that initial reaction and you allow the higher neocortical functions to engage and use the energy, the neural energy that ordinarily would have been focused on that to start developing new functions and new concepts and new cycles and patterns. And
I think that process has to be gone through in a gradual sense, like very small steps at a time, just so that you can build up the resilience to the much, like, say you're agoraphobic or something like that. You can't just like jump out into being in a large crowd and in order to deal with it, because that's just going to be too much sense data that's being taken in. But you can like work your way up through it. Like, that's the kind of feedback loop that Vervake's always talking about. It's like, I'm putting myself into a little bit more dangerous environment, and by being in a little bit more dangerous environment, I'm bolstering my own capacity to be within that environment. And
like,
now
your brain realizes that, okay, I did that and nothing terrible did happen.
Right.
And it loosens its hold a bit on you. At least that's
it's like it's lowering the danger level meter for that type of experience. And then because it's lower, you can move even further outwards. And that's the thing that like Aristotle brings up, like, what is virtue is building up that capacity to do the things that you know to be right. So like, if you are like a cowardly figure because you've never done anything that risked danger or something like that, then you don't even have that capacity within you to do something courageous, because you've kind of built up this whole system of mechanisms within yourself of like it's making you deficient in what you're capable of enacting. Like, even if you have the intellectual knowledge, like, okay, I should do X in this situation, but you haven't built up the real life experience and the capacity to do X, then you have an intellectual knowledge, but not I guess I don't know,
procedural
lived-out experience. Yeah, he
procedural.
Sure. Yeah. Well, or like he brings up the chair maker. You might have like the blueprint for what to do, but you don't have the capacity to fulfill that blueprint. You don't have the ability to create. And thus you have you might have knowledge, like intellectual knowledge, but you don't have enough wisdom to enact that knowledge, I think.
Well, and there's also the wisdom to know what would be good, and then there's actually doing it. Like Vervake talks about the Socratic challenge. What are you doing to cultivate your character? And I mean, I know in myself, there are a lot of things I do to try to do that. Like this conversation is one of those, but there are other ways that I know I don't, or at least I struggle with it much more than I want to. And you know what? And then I feel, you know, guilty or ashamed because I know what I should do. I know what would be good to do, what would be sort of the virtuous thing to do. And then anxiety can come in and I don't do it. So, you know, it's, you know, the wisdom of knowing, okay, this would be a pretty good thing for me to do right now. Not doing it would not be in my best interest, but then doing it is still doing it is a separate question. So it's interesting, the difference between wisdom and action. Wisdom on its own is useful, but if you don't actually put it into action, then, you know, it's sort of self-masturbatory.
Yeah. Yeah. And like for myself too, like I being introverted, it's very hard to get myself to do the things that I know to be good. Like I recognize that there's this set of skills that I need to foster within myself. And in order to do that, I have to put myself into these types of situations. But it's very hard because like, it's not even due to anxiety. It's just like a complete negative, like weight towards those types of activities that it's just like, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to get anything out of that. It's just going to be something I don't want to do. It's like, yeah, there's these situations, I guess, that you either have to like force yourself into doing it, but that's of course hard to do as well, or creating some sort of story to tell yourself that can help you get through it. Like, okay, it's not going to be a big deal or anything like that. Nothing's going to happen that would be negative at all. It's like it's almost like lying to yourself just so that you can get to do what you know is correct.
Well, it's lying to one part of yourself, right? Because you can't actually lie to yourself, like your whole self, because what would be doing the lying? So there's one part of yourself that's doing the lying, another part of yourself that's doing the believing, right? What the hell is that really going on? We don't know, but just like there's a part of yourself that really enjoys commanding things. We have a name for that anatomically, is like the executive function center of the brain. Start to divide that further, right? But there's a part of your brain that really likes ordering behaviors and making them happen.
I have ADHD, so yeah, I have my challenges with the executive function. That's right where it.
Right. So all of that is depressed and or not as strong as other regions of the brain that are just saying, "Hey, look at this! Hey, look at this! Hey, look at this!" Right? Your attention center is a little wonky. I'm right there with you, by the way. And a lot of people, right? We've all struggled with, especially in this environment. In this environment, again, we are not just ADHD. We are in an environment that is conforming us to it. And so those capacities within us, genetic, are being brought forth. They're being epigenetically expressed, so to speak, in the presence of these extraordinarily wide novel stimuli. So,
well, this is actually a good time. I guess I diverted it earlier, but to bring in, you know, conformity and what Vervake talks about with that Aristotle. And it's sort of interesting where I like the Aristotelian approach here, sort of as an analogy, rather than, I think Vervake says a few times, let's not focus on whether he's right, but focus, I think, on whether it's useful. And I think Aristotle's view is, you know, the chair maker, you know, the guy who knows all the ins and outs of how to build it, is forming himself to the idea of the chair more than the person who just sits in it. And that's where the idea of conformity comes from. And it's interesting. I don't think literally, you know, like I think Aristotle, thought, at least as Vervake describes it, you know, that you are actually transforming yourself, sort of part of yourself, into the form of the chair. I think that's a good analogy. Like, obviously it's different processes in real, you know, as we know it, but it's sort of, the more I understand something, the more I'm forming myself in line with it, is an interesting way of thinking about it.
Well, yeah, like you can think about it like learning to play the piano. As you start learning to play the piano, you don't have the correct like fluency in how you move your fingers to create a melody or anything like that. But through the practice of actually doing so, are you able to actually build up that much more fluent basic motor control of your fingers in a way that you don't even have to think about it at all. Like when you're, so that's at least like one way. And like we brought up earlier, how like the car conforms the environment around it, as well as like the society to the car, and the car, like society creates the car then reshapes society. There is this conforming nature between the two objects there. So that, like, so the chair maker, they increase their skill and their capacity to create chairs, and through their shaping of the chair into something. Because I don't know if you can get away from the patterns of things. So what is it? The formal cause is what Aristotle uses, that things are like, even if you hold the, like, that everything is just built up out of particles, there's still the structure in which those particles are together or arranged. Like,
well, that's everything, right? That's the whole kit and caboodle. You know, they may all be every. Well, in terms of our use of things, all these physical objects may be made of identical tiny particles, but it's the way these particles interact that create everything that we see around us and allow us to use them. That makes a difference between two meteorites in space crashing into each other versus just particles out in space moving past each other. I mean, it's the interaction between these particles that make everything practical effects, rather than just a mess of particles floating around.
So you have the particles, which are the material cause of all our objects. Then you have the formal cause, which is the pattern or the structure or the organization of those particles into something that we, let's say, overlay a social construct of, say, chair, something like that, or microphone or phone or anything like that. And the thing is, we're always interacting with these forms of things rather than the particles themselves. So I'm interacting with this as from its social construct perspective. I'm not interacting with this like it's particles. I'm interacting with like it's a tool, and it has functions to it, and I can achieve ends through the use of. That's the thing. If I'm interacting with this like it is the social construct that I'm overlaying onto it, I can achieve a certain end. Like, I have certain capacities when I do that. That if I were to interact with it simply according to its material cause, those capacities would not be had. So maybe it's just me reshaping how I'm interacting with things, that I'm more focused on what the formal aspect of a thing is.
Well, okay, so I think what he was identifying in those classifications was the distinction between where the knowledge lies. It's something like that. It's like where the seat of the knowledge lies. So you can say that the material cause of the phone is entirely inherent. So it's nothing outside of the phone determines its interior structure. Right? You can say that, but that's not entirely true, because now we know that something like air pressure helps conform the shape of things. But
gravity.
If we were or gravity, right? If we put it in space, the phone would basically stay the same. Yeah. But if you were to ask, what can this phone do? That's a different question.
Right.
And now it's not entirely contained within the phone, but now it's contained within what my imagination is. So,
but also sorry, go on.
No, if I had a chair, I'm going to go back to the chair, and I tore the leg of the chair off, right? The material structure of the leg doesn't change at all. It's the same. I've now broken it free from the chair. And with that shape, even though the material shape isn't changing, I can do all sorts of different things, right? I can go club a small animal for my daily meal. I can go and hammer some rushes to make a mat. I can do all sorts of things with this tool that limited by my imagination, and also whatever it's possible of doing. So if I wanted to go break bowling balls in two with this chair leg, it's unlikely that's possible to do with the chair leg, right? Completely unlikely in its material form for me to do that. if not impossible. So there's an overlap there of conceptual capacity and material cause that doesn't exist. And that's how you end up starting to define what a thing is and what it's capable of, is where those two realms of conceptual capacity overlap, right? That where their capacities overlap.
Yeah. So that's
in that realm that you start to explore the boundaries of these understandings and can even shape the boundaries. So if I say, all right, this is genius, by the way. All right, so I'm gonna grind the wood, the wood of the leg up, and I'm gonna put that powder down into the hole of the ball. And I know I have knowledge that sawdust is extremely flammable, right? So then I'm gonna, and hopefully the explosion will put a crack in the ball, right? So there's my genius idea to alter the shape of the leg to accomplish my goal. And that's me altering the boundary of what was prior the overlap that didn't exist, right? There's no way to make this leg crack open a ball. I had to change the actual boundary conditions, which is done by changing the material form of the shape of the leg itself.
Well, if we get down to a low enough level of abstraction, the difference between external and internal kind of disappear. If we get down to right at the particle level, I mean, we've got particles going in and out of any, like even our hand, every time we touch an object, particles are changing place. You know, they're staying in a similar relationship within our hand and the table, say, but they're exchanging. And like, you know, we breathe in oxygen.
A profligate life there.
No, but you know, but it's interesting. Like, depending on which level of abstraction we're looking at, you know, a lot of these concepts sort of disappear. And you know, and I think it is useful to think that we are, you know, yes, we are individuals, but we're part of a system, and we're constantly interacting with everything, including the air that's around us. And yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like, kind of like brings in what you were saying, like the act of being, in order to be truly rational, is like we have to reconceptualize our environment. And that's the thing. Like, there's multiple frames that we can look at the world within, multiple perspectives, and sometimes like the most useful perspective to take is one in which, okay, I'm going to act as if this material form of atoms and particles is a chair in which I can sit within it. And then sometimes I need to reframe my perspective, say like, okay, there's an intruder in the house. I have nothing heavy at my disposal to use as a weapon. I'm going to break off this chair leg, and now it's no longer a chair leg. Now it's a weapon that I can use to achieve a completely different set of ends that I see as being most valuable. So it's like the way this gets right into Peterson, that the way that we conceptualize the world is predicated upon our goals. So whatever goals we have, that's how we're going to see a thing. Like, if I'm tired, I'm going to look at a tree stump and I'm going to see it as a chair. If I'm an environmentalist, I see a tree stump and I'm going to see this as an injustice in the world, or something like
if
that.
You're a maker of iPhones, you need to understand it at the material level of how all the different components interact. Whereas just as a user, I don't really need to know that.
Right. Yeah. All you need is the abstract understanding of phone. You might need to know some of the functions of it that you can be achieved, but you have, and maybe know how to like operate it, but you don't need to know the internal mechanisms at play, because that is it's not something that it's like, okay, so
yeah,
technology is like what makes things more efficient. So by interacting with this according to its most efficient abstraction, I have no need to know of the internal workings behind it.
Although then, to some extent, like, you know, if you're playing a PC game and you turn your graphics settings up too high, suddenly you realize your computer's getting hot, and suddenly that becomes very relevant. Where you think, wow, if I don't turn this down, my computer is going to melt. And suddenly you do need to know at least something about the material, or if you don't, you're going to find you've crashed your computer, or or if you ever left a phone accidentally in a hot car and you've come back and you see the screens all now rainbowy because you did that.
Okay, so that brings in a good, like, I was kind of wondering about this. Like, when is the correct time to reformulate our perceptions of a thing? Like, when is it time to take on a new perspective for the thing that we held all our lives beforehand, or something like that? And maybe it's the case that when our ability to achieve the normal ends of those things is faltering, or that the ends that,
or discovering a new end. Sorry.
Yeah. That I was just going to bring that up. That maybe it's the case that, okay, yes, sugar is good, it tastes good, and I like that, but it also makes me fat. So maybe if I change my value structure so that I'm not just seeking out whatever is sweet for me, but instead I've got to do this other thing, then it's like a changing of what I find most valuable, or what my goal is, I guess. And so restructuring. Okay, so when you're a little kid, a cookie has a positive value to you because it brings you pleasure. But when you're like more adult and there's other things that maybe would bring greater pleasure for you, that positive value to the cookie needs to be reformulated into your new worldview so that it's actually a negative thing, like, or like something that, okay, this is bad for me, so I shouldn't eat a whole box of Oreos or whatever.
Yeah. All right. So you as a new child develop a love for cookies. You eat a cookie, and this is the way I do with all very abstract mental concepts. I instantiate them. I reify them. I make a tiny little node in my mind. I envision it. So when I'm a child and I eat the cookie, when I eat it, it goes in, and I envision it going into my mind and actually making a tiny little dot, right? A little circle, right? And as I eat more cookies, it grows bigger, right? And that's kind of representative of a dopaminergic resource, right? If I eat it, yeah, that's really good, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? At the same time, you use the eating sugar and overweight. So let's stick with that. If I continue eating, right, so I gain size, and there are, let's say, negative consequences associated with that. Maybe over time I have to keep buying new clothes, and I notice that all of a sudden, like, wait a minute, I'm buying a lot of clothes, or I can't walk as far, or I found myself breathing heavy when I did this task, and that doesn't make sense. And it's now a negative affect. It produces a negative affect. So inside your brain, it starts to grow too, right? As more and more negative affects, right? Because it, just like eating the cookie, you now have this little negative affect growing. And that is predominantly held within the right hemisphere, right? These neurotic associations that we're paying attention to in the environment, which we include ourselves in when we start paying attention to the mirror and all that, and the reputation status, which is highly associated with weight. But if we start letting that grow, if we keep enacting more and more negative possibilities, right? So now our clothes no longer fit. Now we can't even walk down the hall. Now we're actually stuck on a couch, right?
Feel bad.
At some point, it's fighting the other impulse. It starts to actually fight over the very resources with the rest of your body uses to engage in any activity. And now you have a battle, and one of them has to win, or everything falls apart. So you either continue to eat, or I guess that everything falls apart if you choose that one, or you say, okay, the negative affect, that's telling me something about the environment and myself, and I either make an alteration, or I need to examine the consequences, the consequences that seem to be arising from this continued course of action. I think the major problem for all of us in terms of moral consequences is not being able to see the consequences at the start of our choice. So when I was 5 years old and I first fell in love with cookies, I had no concept of what it was to be 350 pounds, 400 pounds, 450 pounds. You just keep going up, 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 up. I had no concept of that. No concept of being diabetic. None of that. Didn't engage in any of it. And so at what level could I claim responsibility at 5 years old for developing that? In some sense, I can't, right? I can't say I'm responsible for the outcome. But as the negative affect grows, I become responsible for engaging in that conflict process inside my own mind. That's what I'm shepherding the conflict of gods, right? The desires within the arena of gods, of all of the behaviors that I could engage in the world. This is the arena in here. And the best, I guess, the best, most happy soul is the one that manages to orchestrate all of these competing desires in a pleasing way, a harmonious way, not only harmonious internally, but engaging with others harmoniously, so that you have a reciprocal feedback loop that it produces more and more positive associations. And that's like a positive culture developing over time. But we do that internally, right? We have this process. And I think you have key pieces that you have to develop, key pieces you have to hold a part of. And one of them is willingness to confront the painful aspects that you don't want to look at, right? Willingness to confront those negative affects so that you can see the full picture of how you're being affected in the environment and what your choices are doing. That's the key, is getting people to be able to look at that without turning away in fear, without running away and activating all of that.
Or to do it while feeling that fear or that desire to run.
Sure, we can call that courage, right? That in the face of fear, we act anyways. And we often do that, I think, from the assurance from another third thing that will be okay, or that will be stronger.
It's hard because, like, I'm someone. I mean, I've had depression and anxiety, and it's caused me all sorts of problems. And for me, I know a lot of the time, I know exactly what would be better or not better. But those feelings you get, the anxiety feeling, or just, I'm a stress eater, so I'll sometimes find myself eating when I'm not even hungry, and I don't even want the junk that I'm eating, and I know in my head it is just going to make me feel bad. I obviously have a more of a weight issue than you guys. It's going to make me, it's not going to make me, it's going to make me fatter. But there's something that emotional feeling of, I need to satiate some need that this food is going to, at least in the present, meet. And it's that battle. And it's so, the problem is that feeling is so intense that it takes an enormous amount of effort to get past it, to trigger our reason and let the reason conclusion take over.
Yeah. Well, I think food in particular is a really rough one, because it engages the mind-gut axis, and that's powerful in ways we still have no clue of, really. I think it's actually involved in a lot of addictions that we don't even really pay attention to, like opiate addictions. These are pills that people consume, right? And then they go into the gut, and they engage in the gut first before they even get to the brain. There are lots of and they actually have profound impacts on gut motility and how much is digested and how it's digested. But yeah, there's all sorts of really powerful controlling mechanisms in our environment that we brush up against and we struggle against. And I think a lot of times we come up against the Leviathan, right? Like the big one. So the thing that we feel like we have no power over. In addictive personalities, and I know all about that, by the way. My father's an alcoholic, and yet I get it. I know how it all functions. So it feels like a monster that you can't beat. When you confront it, it wins, right? And that's and
then you feel shame. You meet the need in the moment, but afterwards, I was saying earlier, like, I know there are times where I'm working on, self-actualization, or working on doing things to meet my potential, so to speak, and then you give in and don't do it, and then you feel bad afterwards. And that can be it's a negative cycle.
So maybe if we were able to use a psychotechnology to surgically cut out that element of it, that the failure is actually a failure, that it's actually restructuring us in a negative way. Maybe we can alter that, because I know that introduces the shame cycle right away. Maybe we can reprogram our brains to think that every time we fail, it's like, it's, instead of sliding down a ladder, it's actually moving one rung up. Maybe it's something like this. Maybe I'm able to convince you. Yeah, maybe I'm able to convince you that you need 100 failures before you succeed, and you're on number 79 right now. right? If I were able to
Right.
convince you to that, you'd be able to go the next 21. You bet I can do that. I can fail 21 more times if I know I'm eventually going to succeed. And that's just climbing the ladder without being able to see the top. That's all it is. But
Right.
but that feeling of sliding down a ladder, that is what kills you far more than actually failing
For
to
sure.
follow it, I think.
For sure. It's a negative reinforcement. Each time you have that guilt feeling of not accomplishing your goal, it reinforces the next time not doing it. It's very unhealthy. That being said, we do it. I can speak for myself. We do it sort of instinctively, and
Wait. I want to say I don't think it's instinctual. I think it's something we learn from our parents and behavior with our parents and interaction with our parents
or ourselves. I mean, I understand. Like my anxiety developed, over time, and it developed very slowly over years, and I can track it. So yeah, it's not just your family,
but the process in which we engage with problems in the environment. I think we learn very early on in terms of watching our parents and how they talk to each other and how they deal with stress, how they solve problems, right?
In my case, I know my dad's much more competent in that kind of stuff than I am. So yeah, so it can work. It's saying it can work both ways. I think you're often right, but it's not always. It's not necessarily like that.
Oh, sure. Well, like everything, there's a spectrum of nature nurture. And so you can have like a child that's like extremely patient, for instance. They come out of the womb and they're just super patient. Right. And then and you can have another child pop out and the next one pops out and they're just completely impatient. And no amount of parenting is going to really adjust that element of the child's personality. Because it's something, once you push it to the scale so far, any adjustment is only a minor one. But what's really interesting about these kinds of scales is in the middle, right? Because this is actually, I think, the process that we're talking about is the difference between the difference between a +10 and a +9 in positive affect is hardly noticeable, right? It's one little notch. But the difference between +1 positive affect and -1 negative affect is qualitatively different.
Yeah.
So that seems like the path that we're walking down. It's like right between positive and negative. Okay. And if you keep experiencing these negative affects, you feel like you're getting pulled over on that side and you get stuck in that realm. And that is in fact the stymieing aspect of growth, right? Like that's what kills your ability to see more of the environment and to feel like you can structure yourself in a more wholesome way. Wholesome, I guess,
Well, this is something I learned from reading Karen Pryor's book, Don't Shoot the Dog, is that positive reinforcement is a much more effective behavioral tool for the creature, whatever it is that you're trying to train, whether it be yourself or your animal, over negative reinforcement. Because for negative reinforcement, say a creature doesn't act like a dog pees on the rug or something like that, and then you respond with some sort of negative response towards that thing, like smacking it on its nose or something like that. That creates a negative reinforcement for that dog, but not necessarily for that action itself. So it might realize that, okay, if I pee on the rug, I now have to go hide from my owner or something like that. That like re-incentivizes a new mode of going about the world rather than like what the owner's trying to tell to the dog is like, don't pee on the rug, but it's doing it in the wrong way. So the better way of going about doing that is whenever the dog goes outside to pee, or you give them a treat or something like that, or whenever the dog like holds it in. This is a building up of the positive behaviors rather than a negative incentivization of the negative ones, because that it's almost like impossible to do, especially if it's not immediate. That's why like having a shock collar or something like that is actually, whenever you can have a more immediate response to something, is what will I don't know, rewire it within the brain there. But using positive reinforcement though is a much better way of creating a behavior structure.
There's building up and there's tearing down, right? Those are two like fundamental forces in the world, building up and tearing down. And sometimes you have to tear down before you can build back up.
Right.
sometimes, but a lot of times, you don't know what the hell you're doing and you're bad at it anyways. So stop tearing things down.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to be tearing down something that you don't know what it's there for. That's the Chesterton fence example that's always used.
Yeah. So like my children, for instance, right? I have 2 boys and they're so aggressive, so high. They're like just full of energy and want to do their own thing and completely immune to any kind of suggestion sometimes, right? Like positive, negative, whatever. They just doing their own thing. And they have to be socialized, right? They have to. It's behavior that if everyone were doing it all the time, it's just chaos and nobody can cooperate and get anything done. But I can go about it different ways. I can say, well, this stubbornness inside them is something I have to exterminate, right? I have to kill, I have to quench it inside them in order to get them to conform to society, right? Mm-hmm. Or I can say, oh, this is a really valuable skill, this stubbornness. In fact, moving into a landscape where pretty much everyone in the world is trying to sell him something and control his mind through advertisement and, cognitive manipulations, this independence and stubbornness is remarkably useful in this, adaptive landscape. So maybe I shouldn't snuff it out. Maybe I should shepherd it into a form that is as useful as it can be in the current environment or the future one in the case of this new generation. It's a different mentality that has to do with building up as a sense of it versus completely tearing down.
Well, I think a healthy society kind of needs all these different types of people. You need sort of like the leaders who are the people who honestly don't necessarily think too long and deep about things. They make a decision, they take a course of action, and they do it. We need people like that. But I think we also need the people who are like the pleasure of doubt type people, the people who aren't necessarily the leaders, but they are going to go a lot deeper and to figure things out. And then hopefully you have a system where you have these people who maybe aren't great leaders, but are really good at getting into, really good at indecision, but really go into these type of concepts. And then it can trickle up. Those people can figure out the ways to go, and then it trickles up to the leaders who then enact it. And so it's not that either is like, I think too many people say, well, if you're, I don't like these fence sitters because, if we all did this, we'd never get anything done. And that's true, but that's not the objective. It's not, it's to say we need people like that, so good. You're a person like that. Let's use you to do the best that we can. And then, and we need the people who don't think about things at all.
Well, it's also likely that some of the criticism is what moves some of those people in the social setting. So it could be that someone complaining about being a fence sitter is what moves someone on the fence towards one or the other side. And that is in fact how social mobility is occurring. And that's a valuable function. It's a mechanism that allows dynamic alterations in the environment. I think you're right, though. We absolutely need different divisions of roles because of capacities, and because the environment requires that I have both hands and feet, right? I can run and catch things with my hands. If I had only feet, I can only catch with my mouth, and I'm much better at catching things than a creature that only has a mouth and no opposable thumbs. Right. And the same is true. So what you're describing, that process socially, is interestingly enough, is what happens in the brain cognitively. Right? You have your fence sitters in the background. That's your right hemisphere, paying attention to the environment. Like, I don't know, what should we do? I don't know. Should I go get that food? Okay, I'm hungry. What do I want to eat? I don't know what I want to eat. And like, there's this whole process going on. But eventually you have to say, the leader steps in, the executive function center, says God, this is stupid. You're thinking about this too long. We need to go. We need to make a decision. And fascinatingly enough, we have structured our businesses and our politics in very much the same way. And once you start to develop a clearer picture of our internal workings, it totally makes sense that we would kind of holographically project ourselves socially.
I wonder if pleasure of doubt there just kind of debunked Kant's categorical imperative. Because like if the categorical imperative is like do every action that you would desire every other person within your society to do that action as well, then it kind of doesn't make sense then. Like if we don't want everyone to be as stubborn as everyone else, and we don't want everyone to be as milquetoast as everyone else either. We want both of those people there so that, especially with a dynamic environment, to be able to adapt to the new situation. So I always think about this example from The Selfish Gene, where you have the altruistic or the, I forget the exact way he puts it, but yeah, the altruistic creatures that share all of their food with the other people within their group. And then you have the selfish creatures that are able to exploit that. So if you have too many selfish creatures that are always taking from the others, oh gosh, he uses like hawks and doves, I think is the analogy that he uses. Then you'll have too many hawks that are just taking without actually producing. And then they'll die off to the point where more doves, a dove-like behavior is what's required in order to survive. But if you have too many doves in a situation, then that just makes it so you're viable, or you're susceptible to hawkish behaviors to come in and exploit your entire system to the point of like damaging it, because too many hawks will be produced and you won't be able to sustain your environment. So there's this balance that's required of hawks and doves that, like, okay, I realize you're a hawk, so I'm going to treat you like a hawk and not give you certain things, or I don't know. It has to be at least some sort of balance between being aware that you're not being too hawkish and not being too dovish.
Like that's the issue I have with the objectivists who take the positive and negative traits to the extreme. Like, you want to have in a society, the guy who builds the trains or makes the building, in Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. You want to have those people who are just so internally motivated that they're just focused and maybe they're brilliant and they just create things. And it's true. If everybody said, the only good things in life are helping others, and we always have to sort of hurt ourselves to help others. I mean, that would be a bad thing, but it would also be a bad thing if we had no one who wanted to help others. Because something is bad at the extremes doesn't mean it's bad, bad in moderation. And if everybody was like, I forget the names of the characters, the heroes of
the Howard Rourke
and the Fountainhead,
Howard Rourke. Yeah.
Like if everybody was like that, I think that would be a pretty terrible society too. What you want a few Harold Rourkes and John Galts. You want a few, people who are self-sacrificing and help others and look out for others. And
can you imagine
want a bunch
if
of people
Jesus Christ was twins? If he had twins, or Buddha, there were two Buddhas.
But you
Like,
want
yeah,
these
Imagine
people.
that. What would that be like?
Like a bizarro Jesus or a bizarro Buddha.
No, there's two of the exact same Jesuses, just the two of them. Like both of them riding donkeys in the Jerusalem. Okay. What would that even be like? That, like, do they compete with each other? Do they walk hand in hand into the new environment? Like,
I wonder if it might be kind of like the Old West, like this town ain't big enough for the two of us. One would have to go to some other town to do his thing.
Well, so why does the brain not have two executive functioning centers? Like,
Well, I mean, executive function's a system, so it's not. I mean, you could see it as a bunch of independent parts, or you can see it as one system. So it's not that it doesn't have. It's one system.
I wonder if it's almost like Occam's razor, where like if you have one character type, they're performing their function adequately. That's not really required of having that same exact character type just next to it. It's like I wonder if that's like I don't know, maybe the one of them will take a more dominant behavior and the other would take a more submissive approach to things. That way there is a balance there. That way you're not making it inefficient practice of two things of the same type that are there when only one could do.
no man can serve two masters.
Mm-hmm.
For either he will love the one and what is it? Cling to the other, or serve the one and despise the other, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's hate the other, but or I guess it depends on
what language are you trying? Yeah, who knows?
Can you guys clarify something here?
Oh, Sumit's still
How-
here. Imagine that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm making notes also.
Oh, good. Hey,
Yeah.
he's scribing.
Hey. Yeah.
Hey.
Okay.
We need to talk.
Yep. So, if everyone is nice person in the society and helping other person, then what's wrong with that? You guys, is that something you don't want to be scaled to that level? What's wrong with that? If everyone in society was little less selfish and more compassionate, then I think I would like to live in that society.
I would too, but the thing is, it's leaving itself vulnerable to exploiters. So if there is no mechanism to point out people that aren't actually putting in their effort to the work. So, like, what is the term in evolutionary, like, biologists that study religions? They have a term for like sacrificial behaviors, or it's something that is like a social indicator of I'm making sacrifices along with the rest of the group. So it's like the free rider problem. You can have a group in which everybody is being nice to each other and sharing with each other, kind of a communal living type style. But if there's one person that is only reaping the benefits of the work of everyone else, but not actually putting in any effort towards helping with that, then they are a free rider. And then their behaviors are the most incentivized by the environment that they're within. So like if a kid sees a cookie on the ground or in a jar or something like that, and they see it within their ability to eat that cookie, that's like a rational decision for them to make based upon like their understanding of cookies and their taste and the positive salience that's associated with all of that. So at least you can have a mostly altruistic group insofar as you have social cueing mechanisms to say that, okay, so that everyone can be made aware that everyone else is kind of pulling their part, because people do not like free riders in their group that are exploiting them and will become disenfranchised with the system itself if there are people that they see as like gaming the system or cheating. That's the thing. Like, we're very keen knowers of or keen perceivers of when and where people are cheating. But yeah,
it would be a bit like if you ate all your food. Okay, so just
right.
Everyone knows what a colostomy bag is, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
You just attach a colostomy bag and kind of siphon all the food before it gets to the gut, right?
Okay, I don't understand the analogy there. Then I guess. Oh, like, okay, because it's not actually providing nourishment for the body. Like, it's going through the eating mechanism, and or I'm getting the taste and all of that, but it's being siphoned off by like a parasitic bag, even though the bag isn't actually benefited from it.
You got a hole in your boundary, and the food, the resource that you use to actually function, the mechanism itself is leaking out that boundary. When you design any kind of closed system that's using energy, you always have to pay attention to these kinds of leakages, these energy leakages.
Right.
But most frequently, the thing that you can't escape is heat. For instance, like when you're designing a system, there's always friction, there's always heat in a moving system, and this is leakage. It's inefficiency. It's energy that was once in the system that is now no longer usable.
Right. Like if you're going over your books and you're saying, there's $200 that's missing. Where did that $200 get put towards?
Yep.
Like, there's a parasite in the system here.
Yep. Exactly.
Well,
so
getting back to Sumit's question, I think, the fact is we only have limited time to act. So if you have everybody acting in the same way, well, there are things that aren't going to be done in society that would be useful. I mean, if everyone is just focused on helping other people all the time, then you don't have people, they're not focusing inward, or people like, the Harold Rourke's or the Bill Gates or the Elon Musk, who are just, focused on creating amazing things in order to build these huge empires, and then they can, do good things for others too. If no one is doing that, then we're missing out, I think, on a lot of value. But if no one is taking care of other people, well, then we have a pretty bad society, because any of us can be in a situation where we need help of other people. So we all benefit from having diverse people. And the fact is, I think there is, a natural distribution that we seem to have. We have people with different capacities and inclinations and so on. We don't need everybody to be doing the same thing, nor would it be useful to, because if we say everyone has to act like this because we think this is good, well, some people may not be good at that, but they may be good at something else. And having that balance in the society, I think, is healthy. That being said, when you get to people on the extremes, they can cause a lot of damage. So then, we may need to control those people.
Well, I mean, the objectivists do have a point, though, in certain cases, that, like, if you have a society in which everyone is just doing things for other people, they are acting off of a lesser degree of knowledge for what is the best for this other person that I'm acting towards than the person themselves. So, like, say I'm going on a diet, and because I don't know, just for whatever reason, but somebody that, I don't know, is a next door neighbor to me or something like that brings me a large 5-course meal or something like that. That's a good, like, them being altruistic towards me and doing something nice for me. But of course I'm on a diet, so I'm like, I have to sacrifice my value system right now and to appease them, or be rude and, like, waste a lot of resources they had.
Third way, John. Third way.
Give it back to them?
You exact. Okay.
How so?
Think of a third way. Come on, this is an exercise.
I know this is. I mean, there's many different ways, but I am just pointing out that there's a.
You can make an exchange. There. You can say, all right, thank you for this resource. Right, It's going to fill me up. It's going to make me happy because you thought of me. I appreciate that. And now I'd like to, engage in conversation with you. And this conversation is, I'm on a diet, and the food that you brought me is actually contrary to that diet. So let me develop a deeper relationship with you so that you understand my goals on a deeper level, right? And on an emotional level, such that you now feel like you can help support those goals rather than be an antithesis to them. And engaging in that process, that conversation, the dialogue process is necessary, right? It's necessary for reconforming ourselves. I think that's exaptation, though. That's because you have moments of either reject outright, right, or destroy or build up, and this exaptation process is a synthesis process. It's neither reject outright and destroy or build something new entirely else, right? Like leave the neighbor alone and go do. Mm-hmm. It's so a synthesis of the current environment into a new, better whole.
Right. So it's a conformity between both parties there, that we're like, okay, by sharing this story, that's going to change their behavior to either not bring forward food or maybe change the type of food that they bring. Yeah. And it would also change the behavior for the person telling them, because they're
you're no longer introducing a negative affect by rejecting them outright, or you're no longer feeling guilt and shame for having failed to meet your goal.
Right.
You're taking that energy and you say, I don't feel bad. Now I've created a new relationship that's going to help me further my own goal. Right now I've got a new neighbor that knows that I'm on a diet. They've agreed to bring me salads instead of fried chicken or whatever, right? And like all of that emotional, mental labor that you went through as a result of attempting to avoid the shame is part of the exaptation process if you go through it. And you don't have to.
I think you solved the analogy, but I don't know if that's what I was attempting to articulate with the analogy. That, like, when I'm doing things for others, I'm acting off of a basis of limited knowledge. Now, of course, you brought up, like, we have the ability to communicate that knowledge to a certain degree. I don't know. There might be certain things that are secret goals that we're not willing to share with others just because, I don't know, maybe they'll get the wrong idea about what those goals are, or things like that. And it might be the case that those are kind of few and far between, or maybe even bad goals to have in the first place, because they are goals that, well, I don't know. In a lot of ways, I think we don't understand exactly what our goals are, other than the kind of instinct towards them. Like in certain cases, we don't have the ability to articulate our reasonings for why we're doing certain things. Like this is something I got into with somebody else in our chats, that artists, they create their art without even a good understanding of like what all the reasons behind doing so it is. So it might be the case, the point of the analogy was that if I'm doing things for the benefit of others, I'm acting off of a limited knowledge than if they were to be acting for the benefit of themselves.
Right, but part of it may be that to really do good for others, like if I know my neighbor doesn't have enough money for food or whatever, and I want to make him food, maybe part of it is figuring out, do they have any diet restrictions or whatnot? Are they on a diet, like, and not just assuming I know what's best for them and say, hey, I want to help you. I want to make you some food. What would you like me to make you?
Right.
So there could be a more interactive.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like you could do a thing that you think is an altruistic act without doing that prior homework, just because maybe it's more effort. And so you get the positive feeling, or feeling of, I did something good for these people, when in fact it's actually something that's detrimental to them because you didn't check beforehand, or you didn't even check afterwards. Like that's something that happens sometimes with charities, is they'll go through the process, but not have a good system of finding out whether what they did for these people was beneficial for the people or not.
All right. So we can actually, the process that I always go through, this reification process, you can do it again with the earlier example that we did with desiring to go on a diet and lose weight, right? We can now say that the household that has decided to go on a diet is the executive function center, which is decided to choose its own path, right? And the house that brings over as neighbors this food is the habitual network that, brought you to the fridge at 12 a.m. Suddenly you find yourself with the door open and you're like, wait a minute, how did I get here, right? Your neighbors have knocked on the door. They're handing you the food and you're like, oh, okay. So now you're confronted with the conflict. This is the key moment. So in the conflict of the altruistic behavior of the neighbor, the altruistic behavior of the gut, right, of the mind-gut relationship, it's just trying to feed you, man. Right? That's all. It's being altruistic. In that relationship, you have to either directly confront, so you kill it, right? So quash it. I'm not hungry anymore. You can go all the way to the end. This is anorexia. This is bulimia. You can do this, or you can reformulate in this new conversational process, conformational process, this new thing. And that's what I think the objectivists miss when they isolate the analysis on that altruistic side.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking that like the objectivists are almost Kantian in a way, because they're using this universal maxim or principle just instead of being altruistic, of being selfish.
And I'd say that's very true of all hyper left-brained people, right? Their philosophies tend to want to congeal into these very unified positions, right? The convergent positions. That's the Kantian notion. That the way that they deal with convergence and divergence, there's a preference to that. So that's.
I've always wondered. I wondered, like mathematically, when I think about the objectivists, and I don't have the skills to figure this out, but if we took, hypothetically, everyone only acts for themselves versus everyone does, say, 10 or 20% of their actions for someone else. If we're only acting for ourselves, we only have the benefit of the knowledge we have. But if we're acting for other people, you have those economies of scale. So I would think that in terms of benefiting everyone, a society where people do 20% of their activities towards others, I will benefit. Each individual will benefit because they're gaining from those economies of scale of the knowledge of everybody else who is also looking out for them.
Right. That's the other thing too, is like there's a limited knowledge set that I myself have for what's best for me that other people might actually have greater ability to do so. So like you kind of had this stereotypical mother's like eat. And like she's working off of some sort of knowledge of what this other person is, and like maybe from her standpoint it would be better for I don't know, this person to be less skinny. What is this that you shared here?
Okay, so that's
Oh yeah. I played this before.
Theorists, yeah, it's a great website. It's beautiful. Game theorists and economists have been looking exactly at that question for a long time, Bod. And that's a website that runs
evolution of trust.
Cool.
Website.
That's a website that runs exactly through that very thought experiment that you laid out. It's a question of apportioning various roles in the marketplace and how they interact with each other. Right. This is very, very much related to what we're discussing here with the various roles that people fall into.
You know, we should try to get an objectivist on it. Like this, the altruism discussion is a whole discussion on its own. We may want to save this part of the discussion for like a separate discussion just focused on that.
We need to save it. It maybe doesn't need saving, but
well, no, I mean, we want to get back to, because I think there's interesting, like I think this aspect that Vervake brings up on co-identification, and you brought it up earlier, that we're always assuming an identity. We're assigning an identity to everything around me. So we're always assigning a role to ourselves. So in this case, we're assigning ourselves a role of discussion participant, and we have viewers. Well, there's no viewers now, but potentially we assign other people watching as viewers. That we're always in this process, and it's a continual process of shaping our worldview. And worldview is more than just your views on God or everything, but it's just if we he gives the example of the tennis player who walks into a football arena and feels lost, whereas a football player who walks in, the football player is at home. He understands his place in it, where the tennis player is there and like, what do I do here? I don't know what the rules are. And it's this back and forth in every situation we're in. We're constantly assessing our arena, assigning ourselves a role, and assigning everybody else a role. And if we can't do that, that's what causes absurdity and confusion. If we don't know what we're doing, if we're in this conversation like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here, that's when we run into problems. And it's very interesting that worldview is more than just, we always talk about worldview in terms of, are you a theist, an atheist, or, your big philosophies. But it's really interesting that Aristotle seems to break it down much more to the local level, and it's a constantly evolving thing. And, Vervake talks about, for Aristotle, there was no difference between being and knowing, and just how you conceive of yourself is how you are.
Right.
So this. Oh, I want to bring in this. This actually is. I want to generalize this process. Wait, John, what were you going to say?
I was just going to go into my notes on that specific topic. So if you want to go share yours first, that's fine.
Well, no, yeah, just generalize the process of exaptation, perhaps. So if we go back to the example of standing at the edge of the diving board, right? And you have in your mind a kind of binary state. It's a quantum superposition of states, jump or not jump.
It's locked within the potential until it becomes actualized.
Right, yeah. So you're sitting there and you're waiting, and you have to make a decision whether or not to jump. And you start to bring in stuff to help you make that decision. Things that you bring in are vital to whether or not you make the jump or not jump decision.
What do you mean, like bringing in like memories?
Yeah, memories are it, exactly, or analysis, which is another part of memory. So if you spent the 2 years prior to getting up on that diving board as a gymnast, utilizing your body in extraordinary acrobatic ways and developing a skill set related to moving your body and how it moves in space, the chances of you standing at the edge of that diving board and feeling extraordinary fear and incapacity lower a great deal. Right now, you suddenly have a whole history of body movement and body capacity and falling and injury that you can overlay, which is not exactly the same, but you can exact that understanding into the current situation, which gives a value weighting to whether or not you should jump or not jump. The total number of different ways in which you can bring other information in, right, is this enlarging process of understanding the ramifications and all of that in the unique circumstance you're in. But that's exaptation. And it is always the presence of a binary state, yes or not, right? And then the process of pulling in, this is the generalization that I want to do, pulling in a third thing which alters the framework that you're using to examine that war going on between the two things. That is the process of exaptation. It is this thing exists and this thing exists, but there is a third thing that can exist if I just bring in other things and start playing around with it.
Right.
And so that's true for the food too, right? Like if your neighbors come over and offer you food, if you have all this skill with, like, let's say you're a politician, the first thing you're going to think is, oh, come on in. This is great. Hallelujah. Neighbors. I love neighbors. I love people. Tell me about your story. Thank you for bringing the food. Have a seat. Do you like wine? Here's some wine, right? And there you start to engage in this process naturally using the skill set that you have from politics to exact the situation into something that is positive rather than, they brought me food and I don't want to eat. Mm-hmm. Like that is it. And it's that skill set that you're using, whatever it is, if you can, to map this current situation in a way that you can make a positive growth out of it. So that's the generalized process of exaptation, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, but yeah, with Vervake, he brings in the identity in the arena, that in order to like act within the world, you kind of have to assume some sort of identity for yourself, and you're doing it both in relation to your environment, also your social environment, things like that, where like I can assume the identity of a tennis player, but if I'm in a football arena, it's going to be kind of an impractical identity for me to assume. So it might, like, maybe instead I assume the identity of a football player and act according to the rules of what a football player does, something like that. And there's the other element that I kind of touched on, that for an identity to be in congruence with the environment, it also has to be something that is shared by the other players in that environment. So like it works well in here where I'm a conversation participant. That's the identity I'm assuming when I'm with another conversation participant, and we're both seeing each other as that. Now, if I was to take the identity of, say, I don't know, leader or mastermind or whatever it is, and you're the dupe, and I'm trying to pull a con on you or something like that, then you might be acting off of a certain identity, like, oh, we're conversation partners here, but I'm acting off of a completely different identity, and because of that, I'm going to be able to exploit you in some way, just because we're not sharing an eidos, I think is the term that he uses for what's occurring here. Like, we're not, like, I have this identity that I have under what I'm going to be acting according to. Like, I'm according to a rules of a confidence man, and you're acting according to the rules of the conversation partner, which happened to align perfectly with my rules of your identity as a dupe, if that was the thing that was going on. I mean, just because that does happen, like sure. it with like a sales, if you're in an interaction with a salesman and you're the dupe, I mean, in certain occasions, yes, like it's good to be aware that, okay, he sees me as a dupe in this situation. I have to recognize that this is the way that he's seeing me and act accordingly. Like, I can't be just able to be led wherever he goes. I have to push back against some of the things that he's saying here.
Well, but that's true. And then we also, I think, do this in unproductive ways. In that, I talk a lot about the us versus them. And we see this a lot in discussions where we're constantly reassessing our role in the discussion and their role. So if I see a lot of people in discussions, I find in arguments, see themselves, for example, as teachers. I'm trying to teach the other person, and they're either getting it or not getting it. Now, think about it. If you don't think of yourself as a teacher, think of how the conversation is different if you think of yourself as mutually exploring an issue. Suddenly everything shifts. It changes the way you approach the conversation, because it's now you're not teaching, you're sharing. And if you're a teacher, usually teachers don't, they may ask for questions, but they're not really looking for much input from their students. They are imparting the
Yeah.
knowledge, versus if it's a mutual discussion, it changes how you react. Or, like you said, if in a discussion, I think each side often sees the other as the confidence salesman, as the guy trying to scam me or sell me a bill of
Right.
goods. And so they react in that way. They think, I have to protect myself against the manipulated tactics of the other side. Whereas, and often each side sees the other as trying to do that to them. So rather than focusing on sharing ideas, they're focusing on protecting themselves. And each side is equally doing it to the other, and this results in completely unproductive discussions, because we've incorrectly often assessed the arena, or done it in an unnecessary. We've just inaccurately assessed the motives of the other person. So it can be good if the person really is. There are people who really are trying to do that, and so then you should react protectively. There are people who try to con and manipulate. But if we're wrong, then it can lead to really bad results.
Right. But yeah, just like on Twitter, like you'll get into some of those types of conversations, and like maybe you have this idea like, okay, this guy is naive, he doesn't know the facts, I'm going to teach him, I'm going to enlighten him of the situation that is at hand. And so I have this identity of like, oh, I'm helping him. This is my role that I'm identifying with. And then from the other subjective perspective, maybe he's seeing me as, oh, he's trying to sell me something. He's trying to change me. He's trying to exploit my behavior by changing me so that, I don't know, it works in his favor. And so I'm going to have to push back against that, because I don't want to be cheated. I don't want to be sold a bill of goods, anything like that. And so, yeah, we have to figure out a way in which to share some sort of identity, or like, what are the roles that we're playing in this conversation here? Because like,
yeah, it's the epistemic ambiguity again, right? So imagine if you went to the car salesman, and the first thing he says to you is, all right, look, there's a $5,000 window of negotiation here. That's it. Okay, it's $5,000. If I don't like you, I'm not budging from 5,000 plus. If I really like you, you can get me down to $1 if you want. All right, ready, you go. Now you have very clear boundaries and very clear understanding of what's going on there. It's no longer epistemic uncertainty. You have a sense of what the game is, but in many cases you don't have that sense, and you don't know what rules to play. You don't know what rules to enact.
Well, this is where we can also bring it back to the self-reflection. Whereas, I think we're constantly assigning these roles to people, but, it's a mix between, okay, well, we have to act. So we have to sort of assign a role and then stick with it to some extent. But on the other hand, we always have to be reassessing that role. If we're only going to dogmatically stick to our initial assessment, we're not taking into account the times where we get it wrong. And that's where I think a lot of problems arise, where we just, we form that first impression based on maybe very little information, and it can be very difficult. That's why we say, first impressions are crucial.
I'll give you 500, but you got to throw in a wax, and you have to do the paperwork for the registration. Okay. Now, the problem, I think, comes in arguments or negotiations where it's axiomatic. You have no room for negotiation. Right? So if God exists or doesn't, you can't throw in registration. You can't throw in $500. There's no element argument where you can negotiate. Right?
Yeah, but you can negotiate. Is my understanding, is my current belief on whether God exists or not correct? Am I open to being wrong? Am I open to new information that could change my view in this? Someone who is absolutely dead set either way, you're not likely to get too much of a back and forth discussion, because they're not convinced that they should change their view if they're wrong, or that they could be wrong.
Well, here's the interesting thing is, like, I don't think that we have full control over what we are allowed to identify as. So like, I talk with this guy, Craig Reed, quite a bit, and he identifies as a Democrat, even though he kind of has more conservative leanings. But because of his mother, he loves his mother so much that if she were to find out that he was actually kind of a conservative or voted Republican, anything like that, it would tear her apart. So he identifies his role as a Democrat, and
Craig
like
is mama's boy.
yeah, and like that, he's perfectly comfortable with it. Like he recognizes that, like
I'm a mama's boy too.
yeah, there's this identity that he kind of has to. Well, it's not like he has to. He's accepted that this is something that would be for the best for him to adopt, and so that's kind of like the thing. It's outside of his control of being of changing, and I think that's kind of the case with a lot of the identities that we have now. On certain occasions, that we are more willing to change our identity based upon the success of that identity put into practice. So like you can be maybe a Trump supporter, but if there are certain things that Trump maybe made campaign promises on and then didn't seem to fulfill them, that's kind of a greater system. That's like a greater place of vulnerability for that identity to change as a Trump supporter, because like Trump supporter is kind of it's not always a fluid identity, because like it might be the case with Craig where he's accepted it not for his own case but for his family's case. Like his identity as a son to his mother is of greater importance than his political identity. And I think that's kind of the case, is like each of our identities are kind of nested within some other identity. And so it'd be better to focus on the identities that are more malleable by looking at what is the underlying identity that it relies upon. So like if I was to try to convince him to be a conservative, I can't work with I can't make my case to his political identity, because that political identity is subservient to his relational identity with his parent. So I'd have to instead make the case like, okay, you love your mom. Here's what you would be better for her if you, I don't know, voted Republican or something like that. If I was to make a case kind of like that, I think, yeah, it's very rarely do we ever know what the full extent of the nested identities that we're speaking with someone as.
Those implicit identities, those hidden characters.
And they might not even be known to the person themselves, like the reasons for why, like, okay, I'm a Democrat, but he doesn't know that he's just doing it because he loves his mom so much that it would break her heart for him to identify as anything other than a Democrat.
Well, here's the thing, like this is where we bring back again to Aristotle's rationality. Rationality is when we're self-reflecting. I think the point is we do just instinctively assign these these arenas and these roles. Mm-hmm. But if we're not consciously deliberating on what our role is and what the arena is, are we being rational? It's like I think just asking yourself the question, what is the arena, what is my role, is probably a step further in rationality, and that may help us get past our biases than not consciously asking ourselves the question, because I think most of the time we don't pause and assess that, and that's probably a very useful thing, especially in terms of debate, when you're dealing with the other side. Like if we ask ourselves, okay, what's the arena, what's my role, and I have this instinctual distrust of them, I have this bias against the other side, I think he's trying to con me, or he's trying to manipulate me with his debate tactics, and he's trying to trap me. And but what would it be different if I saw him not in that way and approached it not in that way? Would it change the discussion? And just having that internal dialogue on that, I think, will make us more open and more rational than just doing it through our normal instinctive way.
Yeah, I'm going to use this quote that I think used yesterday as well, but it's very relevant. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. It's by Jung. That, like, yeah, for a lot of these things that are outside of our awareness, like that we're not actually trying to make conscious awareness of, then it's going to be directing our lives without our ability to know it, and we'll have no control over it, because it's like we've seceded, or not seceded, we've given control over to our unconscious parts of ourselves to be a pawn of our own biological drives or whatever it is, and maybe social drives or things like that that are driving us to do the things. But yeah, only when we actually like question it and get a good understanding of like, why am I doing this thing? Like, why do I identify according to this label? Different things like that. Then yeah, otherwise we'll just be falling into that kind of habitual character or behaviors too.
Yeah. And that's where like I think as much as Aristotle, I think with modern knowledge, we know in some aspects he was wrong. As I'm learning about his perspective, I mean, the brilliance in it is whether he's right or wrong in technical terms, these concepts are incredibly useful, I think, to functioning. Like even in this whole having a worldview, like you always have to have a worldview where if you can't place yourself in an arena with a role, you're going to be lost. Now, we could say, well, we may be wrong about the arena and our role. We may have done a bad job of assessing it, which is suboptimal, but without assessing it at all, we're lost. So right. To some extent, it doesn't matter if we're right in our assessment. To function, we have to have some assessment of the arena and our role and the other person's role. But that being said, we then need to push it further to self-reflect, to consistently reanalyze whether we've correctly assessed it and interact with other people. And as you move each step through this process, you're going to get more and more rational. And I think that's something I can't remember in any of the discussions I see out there or debates or whatever. I can't remember these concepts being brought up. And I've watched a lot of arguments and debates over the years, and I've never once seen anyone draw attention to this. And I can't help but think this is an experiment worth trying. Like even at the beginning of a debate saying, let's just nail down our roles here, how we see ourselves. Yeah. And to see if that I suspect that might fundamentally change how a discussion or debate goes. If you just take a minute to each of you define your roles, how you see yourself, and maybe not do how you see the others.
You should be required to like look each other deeply in the eyes.
5 minutes of silence where we just stare at each other.
Well, I don't know. That could get maybe passive aggressive, but
yeah. Well, the thing is too, like it's not even like we have full social constructivist control over what the roles are going to be. Sometimes the very location or setup of the environment is going to influence what the role is going to be. So let's say you're on a stage and there's a podium and there's an audience of 5,000 people there. The people on the stage have this awareness that, okay, I'm not directing my arguments towards the other person. I'm directing them towards all of the audience members. The audience members, the very setup of the building makes it so that the people that are sitting out there have to have that role of audience member overlaid onto them. I mean, like, sure, they'll have the subjective individual experience of an individual person that's like kind of a solipsistic worldview of just they exist within their only world, their only perspective. But still, like everyone else in that building has the awareness that they are an audience member. That is their role. And everybody else is also supposed to be an audience member. And then the people on stage are supposed to be directing their discussions towards the audience members. So, yeah.
Is it any wonder that our society thinks that professors are demigods?
But think about just the internet. And like for those of us who grew up with the internet from the beginning, I mean, we even today we refer to IRL, which we refer to in real life. And there's still, I think, to a lot of people, the approach to the internet that it's not real life. And in the early days, I mean, it really was. It was sort of this thing that was aside. But today, when we're so integrated, I think it's a mistake for people to think that their conversations on the internet are less real than their real life. I think, it is more integrated. But if we perceive our conversations on Twitter as not real, that's going to change how we interact with people than if we can think of it as, this is part of me. This is part of my identity. And when people are arguing over the net, if we think of the other side, I think we often forget there's a real person on the other side of the keyboard, on the other side of the screen. And if we forget that, if we assign them a role of sort of this abstract entity who is an opponent to them, who we can treat however we want because it's not real, that's different than if we say, you know what, that's a real person on the other side with feelings and emotions
well, I mean, what you're talking about there is essentially the empathetic, response, the building up of another character within yourself. And one of the big problems is that not many, that exists on a spectrum, right?
No, but what I'm getting at is how we conceive of our role and their role can change it. Like people will say, listen, if you were right in front of me, you'd never say that in real life, because in real life, in person, or even just now, like we're on camera, it's very easy to see the other person as a person. Online, especially with avatars and usernames,
just text.
We forget. So it's not that we have empathy or not. It's that sometimes our empathy would be there if we were in person or we saw them as a person, but we forget that they're people. We almost think like we're dealing with AIs. It's almost like we're playing a game against an NPC. And so you can do whatever you want in Grand Theft Auto to those people without any moral consequence. But if we just conceive of ourselves as, no, this is me, I'm having a debate on Twitter, and if I call them an asshole and I call them, all sorts of names, that's me calling a real person all these terrible things. Versus, oh no, this isn't really real, I can say whatever I want.
I think it has a lot to do with just the notion that things which are easy to do are of little effect, and that things that are hard to do are permanent. But
I don't think it's that. I think
not quite, because like on Twitter, you can call somebody an asshole, or you can fall into that mentality of, I'm just interacting with an AI, and I can say whatever I want. That's the easiest way from within the framework of Twitter. Now, like in this conversation,
I know, but there is nothing. So people do not do the evaluation analysis that he's talking about because of the ease with which it is produced. If it required more energy, so for instance, if they had to log in 5 different times, right, and then like submit a little,
go through a CAPTCHA reading or something.
Yeah, like go through a CAPTCHA, do this kind of like little form about what they want to talk about, register their emotional state, and did all, maybe like, I don't know, right? Or if it requires you to earn a diploma before you get a job, the people, there are all sorts of ways that the amount of work cause you to evaluate something, and because
I think it's deeper than
interact online, we just naturally think of this behavior as temporary or evanescent or of little effect in the world, but in reality, it has something
that you say on Twitter can have ultimate ramifications towards your jobs or career in like 5 years or something like that.
But I think it
also has a network effect on the emotional level too. I think. Sorry, Paul.
It's more than whether it's just easy or hard. I think it's how we are literally placing this co-identification, how we are categorizing ourselves and the agents on the other side. Like, I don't know if you follow Destiny. So Destiny's been having a lot of arguments. He's a Twitch streamer, and he does a lot of political and debates and so on. And there's been this thing in his community and with him where he's getting in a lot of aggressive sort of arguments on Twitter, and then he's bringing in where he's seen as in bad faith or whatnot, and then he's bringing them on stream, and it's a completely different dynamic, and it's much more reasonable, much less aggressive, and it's the same people, the exact same people putting in effort are having entirely different types of conversations, because it's the face-to-face, where you really can tell it's a real person versus the online. So it's not, I don't think it's about that it's easy or not. It's just that I think
no okay, so
conceptualizing ourselves differently.
You're reinforcing my exact point, that like when you engage people face to face,
sorry, you're saying it's harder to do it. It's hard. It's easy when you're face to face. It's easier to identify them where when you're online or in Twitter, you have to do that extra step, and we don't do it. That's sort of.
Well, okay. It's not like you're not identifying people. I truly don't think that people are thinking, it's a bot. I don't think people are doing that.
They're not, but they're not appreciating that they're not bots either. I think
I think what it is very much that the empathetic response is a mirror system. Okay. And to engage it requires certain external stimuli, right? So when you consider someone like on Twitter and you have no image, no nothing, it's just like considering a figment of your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
You don't engage the empathetic response with the figment of your imagination usually. But when you see someone, right, you suddenly engage like all sorts of things, like this fusiform gyrus over here, and it starts to, oh, that's a face. Here are the emotional responses that I need to start looking for. What are his eyebrows doing? Is he smiling? Can I see teeth? Ooh, what's going on there? What's his emotion say? All that stuff starts processing right away. Right. And in the engagement of the emotions and the engagement of the analysis, I have a much more fuller engagement with my total like biological self and the normal ways in which I regulate those processes. So it's much easier for me to go, wait. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that thing that usually spins around with the figments of my imaginations and like this soup of obscenity, like that no one ever hears. But I will tweet that any day because it takes like the moment just through the thumbs, right?
It's like, maybe we're doing ourselves a disservice by still today talking about IRL. Like I do it all the time. I just sort of,
sure.
Yeah,
I agree with that point.
Yeah, we should be. I mean, I wonder if there's, I wonder how the difference of AFK, away from keyboard, changes how you view your actions versus IRL. And if we used a different term than IRL and just something that was more outside of online rather than in real life. Like,
well, I think there's kind of this problem here where there's the ability to change what the identity of the platform is, or like the arena is really based upon what the, like, say, political motivations or the biological motivations, whatever it is that you want to call it. So like if there's certain circumstances, so like you see sometimes that like what Mike Cernovich went through all of James Gunn's tweets to find all his like somewhat edgy pedophilic jokes, something like that, in order to kind of paint this picture that James Gunn is this really dark, sick, twisted person. But that's kind of a misalignment of the identity or the identity of the arena, like for James Gunn and for, I'm sure, many of his followers they had this understanding that, oh, the internet is a place to be edgy and to be funny and to do things to get a reaction. But the world that we exist within now is the internet is not exactly that place anymore. Like the arena, the identity of the arena has changed, even though it's all still within the same platform of Twitter or on the internet.
That's true. That James Gunn wrote that at a time when really the internet, like I think we have morphed. I think it is much more real life than it used to be. And he wrote those tweets at a time where really the collective identity of the internet was really, this is just something we do as an aside. Over the decades, the last 20 years, it's become increasingly real. And to the point today where I think we're in this oxymoron of where we still, a lot of us don't see it as real, but it is real. And in fact, in some ways, it's more real than so much of our lives, of our real lives, is done online. But our attitude towards it, so our identification, our assigning of the arena hasn't quite caught up. And this is causing a lot of problems.
Well, that's the scary thing is like, I might have the idea that, okay, 12 people will see my tweet here. So I'll say something that is purely to them. I know their sense of humor. I can say something that they'll all agree with.
This is the Count Dankula thing. Yeah.
And now what? Somebody sees that is like not part of my followers or something like that. And then they want to raise a huge, like they want to use that for their own political purposes or something like that. They'll boost that and say, look at what this crazy thing this person said is. Now they're like changing the frame of context for what I put my tweet out there as into something that, had I known I was going to be speaking to 5,000 people, I would have definitely changed like my wording for something.
Well, this is Count Dankula's the Nazi pug video, where he said, when he made that video, no one knew who he was. He had a small group of friends that he tweeted to on Twitter, and he just thought it was funny and put it out there. But then, of course, it went viral, and suddenly he's this Nazi, and probably millions of people have now seen it. And the entire, and if he was as famous then as he is now because of that, he probably would have. He either wouldn't have made the video, or he would have added something into the video that made it probably more obvious of what he was doing. So right. So it's just your conception of your role completely changes how you act, and you see this with a lot of people when they're becoming more famous, where you see a lot of streamers or whatnot, where they say, you know what, now that I have a bigger audience, like I now have more responsibility in what I say. I have to be more careful with what I say, because now what I say is actually impacting thousands of people who follow me, whereas before I could just be an idiot and
So it's actually might be smart advice to go back through some of your history and just delete some of those more edgy tweets that you might have had out there, just because I don't know, now they're a vulnerability for you.
I wonder if my kids, for example, who have literally grown up, like I grew up without the internet, I wonder if my kids who are now growing up, like my eldest is 13, literally they're on the internet now when it is part of real life. I wonder if as they get older, they are going to see it much more as part of real life than those of us who have been here through the rise of the internet.
I don't know. That's the thing. It's like real life. It's a scale, like a sliding scale that can be changed. So like I might put something out there and like it's real. Oh, Sumit wanted to mention something. Go right ahead, Sumit.
No, but I only wanted to mention it after you finish.
Okay, yeah, okay. So it's like this. It is real life, but it's a very small portion of real life. Like I'm only talking to my 12 friends, and then somebody can make this tweet that was to the 12 friends much more real life by boosting its signal towards thousands of people. And now suddenly the tweet itself has this much larger like frame that it has to exist within, that it wasn't built for existing within. So I am worried that there is this capacity within the like users of the internet to change the context of things that are put out there and make them either more real life, like with real consequential repercussions to what you put out there for a couple of your friends, into like, okay, now you're fired from your job, or you don't get into a certain college, something like that. There's this ability that's here where people can just use the system to change a person's life, even though when they were making that choice and decision, they weren't considering that it could have this capacity to do this thing. Because how often do you expect something that you write on Twitter is going to have thousands of people mad at you about?
Was it like now after that kid that that the shooting survivor where he had his Harvard where he had his Harvard acceptance rejected because of some came to light some edgy things he had written. Like I've shown that to my kids, and I've said, listen, I don't mind you. I get that being edgy is sort of a part of the internet, but you need to, as you're going through this, you need to keep in mind that everything you say can later come back. So there's a limit. There's some room for just youthful being edgy and being irresponsible. I mean, that's okay to an extent, but you have to know there's a line.
It was no different though when we grew up before the internet. Okay, it's no different. That same exact advice was given to me. When you go outside this house, Tyler, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Yeah, we had all these little sayings, right, that you learn as a kid to regulate your speech in the public forum. And the internet it's a new upgraded version of the public forum, but the same. All right, so like chat rooms and chat forums are the same thing that's been happening long before the internet. You've had little boardroom groups meeting, talking about little imagined versions of the world. Some of them called the Frankfurt School, some of them called the whatever School of Economics, right? Like they're all different versions of how to see the world, and they're true or false, right? But these little illusory versions exist online. And the weirdness about the internet is that, there's no geographical constraints, and the landscape itself is malleable. So you can really imagine whatever world you want. And that's truly what people are doing. And there's a bleeding back into what we would call IRL, with that sense of limitless exploratory capacity, right? Which is what we're seeing in the social justice pressures to regard identity as a fluid concept that can be literally anything you want. And that is the realm of the internet. That's the realm of adoption of any identity at any time for any purpose. It's rather like a stem cell, almost like the concept of a stem cell. It could potentially grow up to be anything, but there's an element of conformation, to bring it back to Vervake, if we could, that occurs when you go through these environmental adaptations. So if you spend a lot of time on 4chan, or if you spend a lot of time on Reddit, or a lot of time on YouTube, you start to you conform to that thing. So now
I'm a 4chaner. I'm
like a YouTube
stereotype of the 4chan user or something like that.
Yeah, and you'll like, or if you're like on Reddit all the time, you'll find yourself looking for hidden narwhales or something. You start imagining the world in a different way, and that's it's absolutely true that because there is a power to produce almost any imagined world on the internet, and because the bleed back comes in IRL, and like the chaos of that is it's obvious now. It's obvious.
Sumit.
Hello. Hi.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I don't know. I feel strongly about this. So I think I'm also having a kind of emotional reaction to it. Because normally I myself know that I cannot go out there and be myself in my society. And there are few people that I run into who are like Joe Rogan types. And with them, I can really be myself, and I feel liberated. So I wanted to get into two different points. The first one is, but the second one is more important. So I'll get into that first. So far, everyone here is kind of talking about conformance and how to respond to this collective censorship of viewers from other people, and how we should behave on the internet in a quote responsible way. And I don't understand. I mean, is there no backbone here? I mean, you have to recognize that this attitude that John, like, even if you said you are some kind of communist or Nazi or even a racist, I mean, would I then ask that you not be given a chance to attend a good university and educate yourself? That's the very opposite of progress, in my opinion. And there are like I don't know what the population of the world is, but let's just focus on your country. So you have like 300 million more. How many people you have? So even if 500,000 people on the internet were angry at you for something, that's like 300 million minus 500,000 people like who are not angry. I feel very sad when these, like, even in my country, 20,000 or 30,000 people on the Twitter would go crazy and people would say it's viral, and I'm like, no, there are like 100 crore, 125 crore people minus these 20,000 who are not saying anything. So I mean,
Sumit just
at some
filled
point,
a glass half full with social dynamics.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, Sumit makes a good point. Like, the things that things go viral with is also already within a kind of a selected measure of types of people. So, like, if you have people that are always on Reddit all the time, then and something goes viral on Reddit, then it might be the case that this is just something that appeals to these types of isolationist people on Reddit, and it might have something like, it might not be relevant at all to the greater population, but you can still get that idea that, oh, this is something that's important just because I saw it on Reddit or something like that.
Yeah, well, they actually
become
they become like signals to the characteristics of the group. So you can start to make a diagnosis, or you can start to describe Reddit, right? It skews relatively young, right? It has a high school population, it has a low 20s population, right? It skews relatively left, right? It has interests in science and technology, and you start to notice generalities about the behavior of the group itself.
Right.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, as it produces resources associated with those preferences and demonstrates them, it attracts more people who are attracted to those things, and that's how the echo chambers grow, right? So and they're like funnels, right? As they become more attractive over time, more and more people who are preferentially associated with those things accumulate. And if you don't have a counterbalancing method, like if you don't have a way to continually bring in oppositional ideas to counterbalance that echo chamber, it solidifies over time because the people who are there kick the people who don't agree with them out, right? And then that's how you develop that.
Well, this is part of arena setting and self-reflecting that Aristotle gets at, that in the echo chamber, at some point, I think people stop that process of self-reflecting, and they nail down their arena, which is why when somebody, someone will be in a group and then someone says something, either racist or homophobic, suddenly you completely go back, just like in the Spider-Man movie, where you completely go back and reassess that person now in a negative way, and then the role that you attribute to them now changes, and which is where you lead into things like cancel culture and whatnot. It's changing the assignment that we give to one another, and but often we don't.
And we're always doing that politically too. Like if we see somebody makes a blunder but they're on our side, I can create a story in which that blunder isn't that big of a deal. But if I see a similar type of blunder from the other side, oh my gosh, do you know, audience members, like, they're going to take this as a call to action to go out on the streets and commit acts of violence. Like for my own side, it's jokes. For the other side, it's calls to action or something
us versus them.
Yeah.
Sumit, you had another one you wanted to put in?
But I feel that I haven't made this point adequately enough. I guess what I'm trying to say is if you want to censor yourself based on what you think the collective internet population wants you to behave, and then behave in that way, that's fine. But it's the same problem that you people mentioned earlier, that this behavior may not be suitable for everyone. There is always a room for people who stand up and say, and I wouldn't want to live in a world where there is no opposition to this. Like somebody has to give you even a real life example. A couple of days back, there was an individual who didn't like Indian accents or something, and he told me that, and that was bad and that was sad. But and other people in the group really handled that situation well by just talking to that person. They weren't like, let's throw this guy out of the group, let's block him. They were just asking him questions, trying to understand what this person is about. Now tomorrow, would I want that person to be in a political office 10 years from now? I mean, I don't know, and because in 10 years he can grow a lot, but people fail to understand that. But I doubt if he can grow that much in 1 month. So after 1 month, if somebody said he shouldn't go to university of somewhere because of that comment that he made, then I feel that you have to really be kind of there has to be a certain level of inhumanity inside you in order for you to
Right.
make that kind of demand, that because I am an Indian and I myself wouldn't want him to lose an opportunity to educate himself just because he said that. I think, I mean, you have to have like zero compassion for other people in order to make these kind of demands. And somebody needs to stand up and say, all of you people who are collectively demanding that this person is fired, there is something wrong with you people,
Well, there's differences. Like I think I think it, like there's a difference between the case of the guy, the digging up a tweet or digging up a comment from 10, 20 years earlier. Like there's that politician that they dug up. He's like 50 something now, and they dug up things from when he was, 20, and your views can change. With this university case, I mean, I think part of the problem is like you said, not a lot of time had passed. Like he made comments in high school, sure, but he is in high school applying to university. The universities the only thing the universities assess is one's conduct during high school. Like that's the entire context of what they're looking for. They're not looking back to what you did in grade school, but they're assessing what your character is like, what you've done during high school. So with that case, like I can see it from the university's perspective where, it wasn't an old comment. This was a comment that was like a year and a half earlier during the time they're assessing. And from their point of view, they're like, there's a lot of people who want to get into our school, and, we can't let everybody in. There are people who haven't recently, called people N-words and stuff like that. And as much as this guy has done some, good things, since the shooting, that really isn't a long time. Like maybe he's had a sea change in view, but he hasn't really had time yet to demonstrate that. And so we can feel compassionate that, okay, he lost an opportunity. On the other hand, like if we were to go back and say, if Harvard knew about that from the get-go, would they have accepted him in the first place? And I think we can much more easily see, they probably wouldn't have, because they don't want people.
How about you let me in on the private conversations of every one of those Harvard?
No, sure. No, that's true. There's a catch-22 there. That's like, on the one hand, we don't want to be held to those things. Although, in fairness, for this guy, from what I've heard, this guy was pretty well known for making those comments throughout the school. But the issue is this: the catch-22 is this. Sure, we don't want to say, okay, we're going to dive into everybody's private correspondence in terms of assessing them, but you still have the problem once something like that is out. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. You can't just pretend you don't know about it either, because then it looks like the school is saying, hey guys, say whatever racist and horrible things you want in your private life, as long as we don't find out about it, you're in. So they're in a really tough spot, Harvard. I mean, I think Harvard made the only choice they could there, which is like they have to think of their reputation, and there's bad.
Harvard is being sued currently for racist discrimination policies in its admission already.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it's a tough case, but I think like what you were saying, Sumit, though, is that I think we do have to distinguish between like a high school student making a recent comment and somebody who's being now held to task for comments they made 20 years ago.
Why do we have anything to say about it at all?
Well,
I don't know.
Harvard, with Harvard, they have a character part of their.
No, I mean, I get that, but that we're not a part of Harvard, right? And like,
why do we?
Well, yeah, like it's become like all of these private interactions and these private behaviors get blown up into the public sphere, public market.
But part of what Harvard said was it showed they weren't really focused as much just on the races. They showed an immaturity, and Harvard is an elite school where they want people maybe with more self-control in that. Like the fact is, not everybody makes that kind of comment, and it's open for them to say, well, we want the type of person who has the self-control not to just make racist edgy comments.
No, my issue was not with Harvard. Just want to clarify, because we have been getting into Harvard for a while. Harvard can choose to reject him or accept him. That's a different issue. I'm not sure if Tyler was trying to make the same point, but I lean more like what Tyler was saying, that why we are getting into this. So I was referring to these lynch mob type of people on the internet, who call for people's to not get into a university or not get an opportunity because
Sure.
of something they did. And I'm like, you guys are sick. I was being I was being maybe politically correct earlier, but that's what I really think, that they are being sick. I mean, they maybe in some situation that is really necessary, because the individual maybe held say such a high office, and he does something that is obviously uh, very very against the morality of even the people who are in jail. Those are different matters, but in general, this attitude that we see on the internet of kind of mobbing people and calling out for their them to lose their job and everything over these matters, I just feel uh, that everyone is just trying to conform to whatever the collective internet morality is, uh, this unofficial censorship, rather than stand up and say, fuck you guys, you guys don't get to do this. And again, so far, even over here, that's what I'm seeing, that don't do this on the internet, don't do that on the internet. And I'm like, no, internet is a place, where you get to share your ideas. And I don't mind if you guys censor yourself all
Well,
the time.
so self-censoring is related to, I mean, in my mind, it's related to the process of socialization.
Mm.
So I often think thoughts that I just should not share. Now, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at filtering my own thoughts. I often share them, but I have a sense of it. I have a sense that there's an acceptability level and a relevance level that I have to pay attention to. And children who haven't developed these filters yet, you can see a lot of them will just babble nonsense or tell you about things that you're not interested in all, and they haven't learned to stop yet. They haven't learned to narrow their conversational capacity. So yeah,
Well, yeah.
I think that if you engage in that, right, that's the filter that you enact. If you engage in that prior, voluntarily, you do it in speech and in the same way that you enact your behaviors on the internet. Again, I think really the problem with the internet is that those thoughts that you ordinarily prevent from being enacted by applying these social filters, the filters are engaged at a certain level of effort, which is, I think, orchestrated with normal face-to-face interactions. But without the engagement of those systems, you don't start to engage the filters in the same way. And so your normal thoughts that you would filter get projected out into the internet much easier, right? And that is what causes the problems. And that's why I think we should be more lenient when we look at the way that people behave on the internet, because they treat it, it's almost like you're peering into their mind, and you want to be more lenient when you're peering into somebody's mind if you're admitting that you yourself have a weird, crazy mind too. Now, there are lots of people that won't do that, by the way. The ones that love to virtue signal, for instance, will hardly ever admit fault. But c'est la vie.
Well, that's it. I mean, the people who are doing this are, and this gets back again to the Aristotle and the self-reflection, are not really they're outraged by this thing, and maybe this thing is probably something. Most of the time, it's something that often that we would generally agree, hey, that's not a great thing, but they don't think about, well, what are all the things that I've done that if it went viral, people would be saying the same thing to me. And it doesn't mean we don't say, hey, that's not a great thing, but maybe we say, depending on what it is, of course, but you know what, maybe the guy doesn't need to lose his job, but maybe, there is a conversation that's worth having, that this is a bad thing and you should probably change. But it doesn't mean the person's just a terrible human being who deserves to be, eradicated from our society.
Yeah, but imagine if like your neighborhood had access to view the internal workings of Pod's household, right?
Oh, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Oh no, oh no, we got to tweet on how he was treating his kids tonight. This is not going to happen. This
Sure,
is,
we've all done that.
Matter of fact, we're not going to give him any spending money next month until he straightens up.
Yeah.
We're going to fire him as dad. He tweets one more time like that, we're going to fire him as dad. That's what I mean. Like, there is
Right. No, I'm agreeing with you there.
There's a level of involvement and supervision that I'm not comfortable with. It's occurring on a social level that seems to attach itself to emotions so strongly that you get these crazy mob mentalities, right?
But the reality is this is where we are now. And what it really means, I think, is like you said, that like we don't, I think most people probably agree, we don't want a society where like just everybody, say at work, talked like 4chaners, like just said anything they want. That's not a good thing. But what we have to do now is we have to maybe expand more of our conception of the public and private, and that the public is a much wider arena now than it used to be. And we can say it shouldn't be that way. My thing is, I don't think we should spend much effort on that because it is that way.
Yeah. I'm saying that the interpretation should be weighted in a different way. That's all. Yeah.
Right. And so I think you're right. We should be more compassionate, I think, to the people who do sort of bad things. And like, I think cancel culture is negative. What I think it would be much more productive to focus on is not punishment for past actions, but working to make things better going forward. And, that I mean, just having something negative go viral is a pretty huge punishment, in and of itself. I mean, just being famous sort of for a bad thing you've done, maybe they don't need to lose their job, depending on what it is. Obviously, there are things that people should lose their jobs for, but I think we have that setting a little bit too.
Sometimes it launches your career into billionaire status.
Yeah.
You just have to kind of like shift your direction.
I think it will take us a long time to get there, and we might not get there at all. I feel the same way about this that Tyler felt about you or someone else saying, "Oh, today I missed my diet. I'm such a bad person. I'm such a lousy dieter. I'm not going to try tomorrow." Rather than look at it that way, look at it in terms of positive event by using a new psychotechnology. So when I was this could have been a very good and positive thing in the sense that what Tyler did a couple of days back when that individual said whatever it is that he said, is to just talk to him, inquire about what he's thinking, what his reasons are for saying that. So if somebody had said something terrible on the internet, which they otherwise wouldn't have said in real life, so that could have been a learning opportunity for them if the environment around them was more surrounded with people like Tyler, because then they would get the education that they need in order to see if they need to modify what they are thinking or not. And internet really opens the door to the whole world. So if tomorrow Tyler is eating beef or something, right, and he makes a Twitter out of it how much he loves beef, now that's gonna offend like God knows how many million Hindus in my country, and all of them are gonna think that it's immoral, and
Tyler,
they
you're
might
canceled.
Tyler then should be. Then you would have millions and millions, because you can't compare your country with India's population, right?
Luckily, they're not all following me on Twitter. I think John's following me, maybe.
No, they don't need to follow you on Twitter.
I'm going to share it with all of India's sites, so I'm going to translate it to them, and that way you'll go viral. Don't worry, Tyler.
No, these things are really happening even in my country. There is a company called Surf Excel that makes this product called Surf Excel, which is a washing powder, and they had a ad where Hindus were playing Holi, and this girl, she said, throw color at me, and then all the color and all the water ran out, and then she took this guy who is a Muslim to the mosque, and the thing there was that in Holi you throw colors at others. So now all the colors had ran out. This Muslim kid could sit behind her bike and go to the mosque without any kind of stains on his clothes. So she was just helping him. It was a neutral thing at best and a cute thing also. So, but a lot of people got angry on Twitter and they started boycotting the company, and it became a good controversy, and that's why I want to bring in my first point, which is you can't always look at internet as a real life, because people make that mistake so many times, because even if let's say a million Hindus were angry at that company over Twitter, which they were not, the number was much less. So American companies, I think, certainly do this. If they get 100,000 something against them, they just become a bunch of pussies. And in this case, that company did stand its ground, and they didn't look at all the outrage on the Twitter. And so what I'm saying is, this world is a big place to begin with, and all these different cultures are going on Twitter. So somebody really has to stand up and say, your way of looking at the things might be different than mine, and your tolerance for these kind of things might be different than mine, and call out for de-escalation.
What if Twitter had that policy baked in? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Like 0 negative tweets. You think they could pull that off?
No.
Would everything have to be phrased in the positive way? Could you do that?
Like,
I really think, so.
I know there's actually a Twitter analysis website. I forget what it's called, but it actually gives you kind of the breakdown for like estimations of positive versus negative tweets that you make. What is it called?
It's just a language analysis game. So that you just look at the total number of negative terms and concepts.
That's exactly what it does. It's social theory. Yeah, that has
about 2 hours and 45 minutes. I think before we end, we should maybe talk about the last aspect of the video, where he goes more into Buddhism, but I found it really interesting what he was talking about, the how we categorize the world and even other people as either in terms of where is it? It's either categorically or expressively. Just the different ways that we see basically the having mode and the being mode. He talks about the castle, which is where we think of what we how we use a thing, that gets our needs. And then I think the being mode is more just how we
conform to the thing, maybe.
Yeah, that it interacts with us. And I think it's like when I talk about the us versus them and in the method of communication, and I think it's like when we us versus them, when we think of the other side as like the enemy, or I'm a conservative and they're a liberal, I think we're seeing them more categorically, like they're the other. But if we change it to sort of see, like he talked about love, and you don't want to see love your partner in that same way. It's more as a mutual, that if we change our way of approaching the other person and see it more as this mutual, I guess mutual being, we can have much better discussions.
So instead of like seeing them as an object by which we maybe can use for our own purposes or have to shape them. So like, I have to teach you why you're wrong about all these certain things.
That's not quite right, John. That's not quite right.
No. Here's what is actually the case. Yeah. Okay.
But we do that, and we give each other permission to do that in certain environments. So, like in these conversations, when you develop a level of trust, which is something like, I'm not a malicious actor, right? I'm here to engage in the dialogue and the search for truth. And so we allow each other the possibility of the change to occur, of each of us to influence the other, influence our thought, which is in fact literal structures in our brains being moved around in different configurations.
There's this like heuristic that I forget where I got it from, but I think it could actually be pretty practical, where rather than, or anytime we're about to use some sort of label or like political label of ourselves or the other side, or like in reference to ourselves or the other side, using the country before that. So like say, if I'm referring to liberals, I would say American liberals. And if referring to conservatives, say American conservatives. So that there is this, like, I guess kind of like what I was bringing up earlier, a
common denominator.
Yeah, common denominator is higher order identity among them that is shared between the American, and where liberal is just a subcomponent to being American.
But that's the key. That's the key. And that's why I think the hyper left brain people have such a problem with this, because they get so locked into thinking of identity as a unity issue. Right. And so they're like, I am a part of this group, but none of that other stuff. Right. Whereas people who are more comfortable in the right space are like, I can be part of this group and this group and this group and this group, and it's all gravy. Right. Let's learn a little bit of language for each of them, and it doesn't matter. That's synonyms. That's lingua franca. That's hyperlingual. Right. But then there are people that just cannot stand that. And their mode of thought is, no, this is the right way to do things. And there's only one way to do it. Right. That's it. I don't know. It's almost like those people belong in the very center of their culture and should not be engaging with other cultures, because if they do, like that's not their proper position. They can't conform themselves to the world without causing some strife, perhaps, or if they go through it, it's just a messy process. Like I've had messy conforming processes in my life for sure, right? Ideas I had about the way the world worked that took years for me to unlearn or just be convinced I was an idiot. That's for sure, especially in my engagement with human beings, right? Like how they work, how I work.
So again, it's like, I think a useful framework to think of, are we in, he calls it like need mode and being mode. So need mode is, I need food to survive. Yes. I need water to survive. Yeah. Whereas
becoming is also,
sorry?
It's also becoming, right? Need mode is becoming mode. It's seeking. It's moving towards something rather than being satisfied with what you have.
And being mode, he defines as mutual development, reciprocal realization. And again, I think these are really useful terms that we don't keep in mind often, or at least not that I've seen. And that these concepts are really useful, that if we start, you almost have a sticky that anytime you're about to engage in these kind of discussions, if we sort of have a cheat sheet of, arena, and role and being mode and need mode, if we can sort of force ourselves, depending on your memory, I have a terrible memory, I need to remind myself, but if we can force ourselves to ask, okay, are we treating this other person in need mode, or are we treating this other person in being mode? I think it just, again, like the other thing, just focusing our mind on that, I think could have a really positive effect. So the question is, how do we practically do it? In the public, if you start talking about Aristotle, it's going to make people's eyes glaze over. And even just saying being mode and need mode, it seems all wishy-washy and like, mutual realization. It seems very, I think a lot of people are going to instinctively react against terms that they think are like new agey, even those Aristotle. But I think we should try to figure out ways to focus on these in the beginning of discussions and see if it has a positive impact on how those discussions go.
Well, I think a lot of it's very deeply ingrained and institutionalized early on in youth, right? So Jordan Peterson often points out, if you don't socialize a kid by the age of 4, likely you're not going to, because it becomes exponentially more difficult as the kind of new pathways stop developing at such a rapid rate and kind of solidify into the shape that your adult brain is going to take. It seems like it is. And anyone who's aged knows that this process occurs. It becomes harder to change. It becomes harder to learn new skills. Yeah. And so I think there's an element of it's just like a stem cell, right? There are certain branches that you take in life, paths that you take where there's really no going back, right? It kind of conforms you in a position and a form that without drastic changes, right? Or maybe even detrimental changes, you're not going to be making any alterations.
But I think that it's harder, but it is not impossible. So I think it's inaccurate to say there's no going back. What we can say is it's a lot harder to change.
Well, no, I think there are things you can't go back to, but you're right. There's probably a whole realm of things that we would normally consider impossible, but are just extra work, extra work.
Right. So, but if we think of it as impossible, it's telling ourselves
it damns you to begin with.
Trying versus if we think of it as hard, we think of it as like a task that's worth working for.
Yeah, or worth avoiding, depending on the framework that you're trying to use, right?
Sorry, John, I interrupted.
Yeah, if you're trying to build yourself up, you're trying to build the argument up to enact, to make a decision, which then kind of, it's like the nerve action potential. It's that climbing build up, right? You're building the argument up, and then there's a fire discharge, and the depolarization occurs, and that's when the event occurs, the action. You made a choice, you did something, and you enacted change in the world, and then you wait, through the loop, you see what the alteration, what the effects are, and then you make an assessment and evaluation. So sometimes you have the sense that you want to build up your argument to do the thing, and sometimes you have the sense of wanting to build up the argument to not do the thing. You're thinking of all the reasons not to do the thing, but there's still a little small voice that's saying, well, maybe we should do the thing. Maybe we should do the thing. And that's what causes you to keep going. And that's you sitting at the edge of the diving board. Should I do the thing? Should I not do the thing? Oh, I should definitely do the thing. Everybody's looking at me and they will laugh if I turn back around right now. I can't fail. I've got to do it. Also, I'll feel bad. I'll feel bad that I didn't get to do it. I know that I'll feel bad about myself. And all these little thoughts, right, that you keep going. Should I do the thing or not do the thing? And that's how we end up developing our identity over time, right? Enough of those choices, enough of those circumstances, and the memories associated with them harden, what we consider to be ourselves. So if you jump off a diving board 1,000 times, you are a high diver, right? Like that's it. That is your identity. And if the world suddenly had no more high diving boards, a part of you would die. And you would feel it as a serious loss of identity. You'd have to either build something else or just give up the ghost, right?
So is the distinction between having mode and being mode, or needing mode and is it needing mode and being mode?
So I think. What was?
Yeah. What was the exact usage that he had?
Yeah, having mode and being mode, or needing mode.
Okay.
Having mode is not met by having something. So we're categorizing things efficiently. We're controlling them effectively. Understanding is categorical. We're putting them in the right category. So here's a cup. It improves our ability to hold things. We're oriented towards me for effective control. We need to have water. So a good cup is a cup that will hold water and allow me to drink, versus being mode, which is our needs are met by becoming something. We need to become mature. We need to become virtuous. They're developmental needs. And he quotes from where he says, because of that, we have to have a particular kind of meaning for existence. It's relating to the world expressively. So when we're in love with somebody, we're engaged in being need. We're trying to become something, meet the needs of meaning and maturity, growth and development, mutual development, reciprocal realization.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So that's very helpful then. So we can consider, say we have some sort of problem, and we can consider, okay, I need to achieve something so that this problem can be resolved. It might instead be the case that the problem is with me, and I need to change myself so that this is no longer a problem that is within me. And maybe I need to change my social environment. So let me see what.
I think it's probably usually the case. You have to change yourself rather than the environment. But I don't know. It depends. Society goes through these cycles, right? This is the kind of Hegelian notion that there are different ratios of those who are wishing to adjust and make changes, and those who are wishing to hold on to and not make changes. And that thesis antithesis synthesis process is kind of cyclical. And I think right now we get to see it swinging rapidly, really rapidly, just because the environment itself is changing so rapidly, which is the internet and all of the products of our technological rush. So
maybe it's kind of a like not best of both worlds, but like it gives us multiple options there. So like if you're within an environment where you can't change the structure of it, so say like the political system of the United States, that's a very kind of set in stone kind of structure here. I'm not going to be able to change the entire thing itself. If I thought like, oh, monarchy is better, I'm not going to be able to make the United States into a monarchist state. So that is one element where, okay, the environment cannot be changed to fit what I see as being profitable. So I'm instead going to have to change my own position that, okay, monarchy might be best in the ideal if I held to that. But because I exist within
dangerous words to speak in the ear of Trump.
Yeah, he's been sharing that GIF a couple times, or no, it wasn't even a GIF. It was anyway. Yeah, that okay. So within the environment I'm in currently, then democracy is the only applicable like political system that we have for my country. So I would have to go through sort of a becoming mode of figuring out, okay, what is the best way to work within democracy? Mm-hmm. But maybe I'm still thinking within needing mode.
Yeah. Or if you're in the 18th century, you can retreat to your little wood clapper boardroom and puff up the cigars and dream up a different social structure and write a book about it in a treatise or whatever. Or now in the modern era, you can get on the internet and join whatever chat room you want to talk about however the world should be. And the internet is now functioning as the imagination. So it's the realm of the imagination for social.
Right, that's true. Because like Marxism is within that kind of just imaginary realm. But if there's enough people within a democratic system that shares in many of the kind of issues that Marxists are pointing out, then that idea will become more susceptible to being acted upon.
Reify portions of it, right? Like that. They bring into existence portions of it. The conceptual ideas that kind of the bedwork of how they bring forth their ideas. It influences how they behave. That's why there's such. It's fascinating because it mimics the same thing happening in biology all the time, the way that organisms kind of infiltrate and always trying to take over the resources of others. And we have immune systems to help prevent it against that. We have parasitic organisms that try to bypass that anyways. Like I wonder how many parasites each of us truly has on our whole body right now that we have no clue of, right? In our, like mites in our eyelashes that are there in everybody, but we're not aware of.
Well, that's the thing. Like depending on how you think about it, you could classify your gut bacteria as parasites in some way because they're like
okay, so that's parasitic behavior thing that was exapted, right? So there was the third way is always some utilization of the two without destroying one or the other. It's something like that. That's the way I conceive of it now. Like the best conceptual third way is the synthesis. You do not destroy the thesis. You don't destroy the antithesis. You bring them together into the synthesis. And that is, that's occurring all the time in these weird, different kind of mimetic ways across multiple different patterns in the universe, in biology, all the time is replicating this kind of, not just by the way within our body, for instance, right? So there's all sorts of organisms in our body that we're not even aware of, like bacteria doing things like you mentioned the gut, but it's likely other places in our body that bacteria are doing things that we still have no clue of. But there are whole externalized aspects to our living now that are part of the external realm too. So It's not just the internal environment that we're utilizing.
Right.
Also, I think like we have to be mindful of when we categorize of what that it has effects. So I think we do this because there's so much information out there. Like we have to stereotype, we have to categorize, or else we can't really function. So we put people in boxes because it helps us. Keep vast amounts of information in line. So we'll reduce somebody to a liberal or a conservative or a theist or an atheist. And we put them in these categories because it helps us, mentally arrange everything so that we can then process it. But there's an effect of that when we're categorizing people, when we're putting them in a box, it shifts how we view them. And we have them more in, I think, the needs having mode rather than the being mode. And sometimes we have to say, okay, well, I've categorized this person because it's helped me sort of analyze it. So it's helped my need to analyze them and place them in. But then I've got to shift. I've got to say, okay, maybe I now need to take a step back from the categorization, see them again as a person, like decategorize them, look at them as an individual with their own ideas and their own thoughts and own feelings when I interact with them. So, because I think when we do too much of just categorizing, we depersonalize. We see them as the opponent, as the them.
Yeah.
So well, then we need to shift.
Yeah. So that process, I think you're describing well there is the process of determining if they're friend or foe, which is a very old process. It's related to very old neurophysiological mechanisms, and because it's very old, because it's very primitive, it works on that binary system of yes, no, friend, foe, right? It needs it in that hyperpolarized sense. It's got to understand the world in that binary way. But without the forcing of that system and in the presence of the consideration that it might be worthwhile, you can start to develop nuance, right? You can expand on your arguments and you actually build new structures in your brain that develop far beyond the binary structure. And that aspect can't be engaged, I think, unless you, one, suppress that lower, more primitive binary aspect, and two, make it worthwhile for people to build the new structures. And that worthwhileness is exhibited in a lot of different ways. So for you personally, Pod, you like conversations, right? You find it energizes you. So you are incentivized to have good conversations. It's an aspect of your own unique personality that furthers, it kind of exapts that process. And it's cool, right? Like it has a pro-social effect. But there's
sorry, go no, keep on going.
No, I just think that there are lots of ways to do that with the brain. There are lots of ways to do that in our social settings, in bringing together these disparate parts within the mind to kind of further pro-social behaviors.
Right, I think you're right. Like it has to, I think, be a conscious process, or it's much more beneficial to do it that way. But one of the reasons it's so hard is when we decategorize them, when we switch from seeing them as having to being, we also then open ourselves more up to being changed by them. And I think that can be very scary for people, that when we start seeing them, we start seeing that guy we dismissed as a Nazi or as a communist or as, that we put in their box to other them. And then we start saying, okay, well, now let's go back and see them as a person with their own set of motives and whatnot. Then we almost instinctively, we start to find ourselves shifting our view of them. They're not quite as cartoonish as the cartoon villain I talk about, they're not quite the enemy we thought they were. They're a person with their pros and their cons and their good points and their bad points and their motives. But that suddenly we're like, whoa, wait a minute. My previous assessment of them, I kind of saw them in a whole different light, and that's uncomfortable for people. It's a hard process to do. Like we're opening ourselves again to being changed, not just how we see them, but how we see them, how they see us, but how we feel about them. It's more than just intellectual. It changes, and I think it's very risky for people, and it makes people vulnerable. And I think that's again why it's so hard and why people are so resistant to doing it.
Yeah, the demonstration of vulnerability is a very interesting aspect of it. It's almost like a signal of humility. It's like a signal of being willing to be programmed by mutual exchange, something like that, right? It's like saying, okay, I trust you, and I'm going to reveal elements of me that are interior, and therefore I'm letting you know there's a portal, right? That there is actually a portal between us, in and out, and that I'm giving you like super user authority, right? Like I'm giving you right authority. You can come in and make some alterations. And I think that's naturally the mode. I think it's actually mediated by oxytocin in some degree, by the way. But it's a natural mode that children have with their parents if they're raised in a normal pro-social setting, I think. Yeah, that they exhibit that sense all the time, that, you know, vulnerable and willing to be programmed, and that's the mirror neuron system, you know, downloading data and like playing it over and over again and seeing if that's good, right? If it elicits goodness in your own sense. So,
all right,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to be heading off, so I think we're gonna have to shut down the stream since it's on my end. But I want to make sure, like, Sumit, is there anything you wanted to add, or any other points that you guys wanted to make before we do? Nope.
Sumit first. Sumit, no? Sumit, yes?
Guess not. He's still muted.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
I couldn't find the mute button. Sorry. Yeah. So I did have questions, but I guess I was away when you guys covered it. So it's on me. I'll get them answered later on. Maybe when you guys are hanging out in water cooler.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that group is.
Right. I should. Sorry.
Or I'll watch the stream again. My questions were around that area. If you haven't covered it, where he talked about the arena and meta meaning and existential mode and to be more specific, I didn't understand what he was talking about when he said worldview attainment and nomological order. He went through that pretty fast. I'm not sure if what he was trying to say there, and I'm not sure if he will get to it later.
We can go over it later. Yeah. Just put something in Discord. We'll
okay.
have a chat.
Yeah, I should mention we have a Discord now. I don't know if we had, or we talked about it last time, maybe in passing, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on over there. So you guys should go check it out.
Any other thoughts? In the closeout, I'll just mention that.
I think this is. I really enjoyed this this lecture. It's the first episode of this series that I've listened to, and I still actually haven't listened to any others. I found it really useful in ways that surprised me. Just that these Aristotelian concepts that I think aren't paid attention to and should be, regardless of and focusing. Forget about focusing on whether what he's saying is technically true. Like there are a lot of very useful sort of psychological concepts that could really have a good impact on us if we were to keep them in mind. And I think it's one thing we should be working on going forward. I think the concepts in this video, I think, will really help us interact with one another and communicate with one another. And if anyone's watching, you can Twitter is at Pleasure of Doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Remember to like
Yeah, that's one of the things about, like, I think just from this recent lecture series and the approach of Aristotle is giving me a kind of perspective of, like, because within Aristotle's worldview, like, everything is drawn towards whatever it is, like, whatever its end is. So, like, the apple falls from the tree because its end is or it's made out of earth. And so earthy things are drawn more towards other earthy things. And so the fire is made partially out of air, so it rises up. There's this conception of the world as things being pulled towards their natural course. And I think it's, well, of course, like using it in terms of like as a replacement for gravity and things like that. I mean, there is a way in which that is, I don't know, obvious, not obviously, but true in many ways. So like there are the properties of Twitter where you use Twitter and it conforms you towards its nature to the point that it's like producing an outcome that is the natural end of Twitter, even if like it's not the exact thing that Jack Dorsey like intentionally put into the product that he's making. But the medium itself has a sort of natural end by which things are produced from it. So like short, pithy tweets that are funny or include cat gifs or things like that. That's part of the natural end of Twitter, because that is the kind of natural consequence that is derived from Twitter. Or you could say even the toxification of our public resource is another natural end of Twitter in some ways, because it is changing the way that we speak about important things without having a human connection or face associated with the person that we're dialoguing with. That could be another.
Even if it's not technically true that these inanimate things have a purpose, it's a very useful way of conceiving it that we can sort of put aside. Okay, we got to fight. Okay, yes, it's not technically true. Let's just put that aside. How can we use this in a useful way to orient ourselves? And I think it really can be.
Right. Yeah. All right.
Well, since you brought up Twitter, maybe it's a useful analogy, right? Sometimes no matter what you put in a furnace, what comes out the other end is ash. No, yeah. So the only thing I want to say is that I'm very grateful for Vervake for doing this work. The condensation of it, the bringing of it together, the synopsis, the analysis, all of this is extraordinarily useful for some of us, right? And to have access to it and to be able to converse over it and pull information out of it, it's phenomenal, right? So this process that we're engaged in right now, the process of dialogue and understanding, is exactly what we were talking about, right? How to best go about that, how to reassert reality when we kind of lose sense of it, how to make sense. And so our channel's, I guess, entirely devoted to that. We've got a lot of projects that are about to see fruition soon that are also devoted to that. And if you're interested in anything that we've discussed or anything related to concept of moving it forward in the realm of the social marketplace, then yeah, join us. So I think we'll probably put a link to Discord or somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just put it in the description because I was thinking about it while we were talking. So yeah.
Perfect. Yep. Okay.
All right.
See you next intermittent week.
Yeah, it was great, guys. Great discussion.
All right.